Yeah, I mean, it's just Luke Ford and the dangers of e-personality. And he's an introvert, incel or whatever. And when he comes out on the internet, he has this, like the dark side of his subconscious becomes conscious. I mean, to me, it's obvious. It's what happens. It's what's happening to you on the same way. But your unconscious, your subconscious is different than Gandalf's subconscious.
Logic and science dictate that not only consciousness doesn't exist, consciousness is in fact scientifically impossible. And yes, it is going to involve math and calculus and science and computer programming. I'm sorry. And have different implications of the process with the connection between the levels of a person's soul and how it reincarnates.
But I'm not going to spur on the issue because I'm not a woman. It's not my issue.
About how one day you're going to fulfill the Canadian dream or the American dream. So you watch Seinfeld and say, I could do it. I'm going to go out tomorrow and go to work and have a great day, and I'm going to be successful. And one day I'm going to have my own apartment. I'm going to have my own parties with my own friends over, and I'm going to have my own possessions. I'm going to see things that I want and just buy them.
Yeah, but that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of yours.
Hello and welcome back to Week in Review with the one and only Doooovid. Happy to be back this Sunday evening to talk about what's been going on with my unique and insightful host. Over to you, Doooovid, for the introductions.
Yeah, great to be back, Jennifer. Thanks for the new intro. Glad to be live this week. I guess COVID-19 is a big deal here. Lockdown, partial lockdown, or however you want to describe, is we're in a bad situation here, but it's still somewhat the calm before the storm. Last week I mentioned the calm before the storm because we had extremely large caseloads, like in the high thousands every day, God forbid, but the death count was still in the tens. And this week, the death count, God forbid, looks like it's probably going to be over 100 every day, and it could get worse. It could, God forbid, even get into the hundreds, God forbid. But we had like 10,000 new cases the other day, and that so even with the projected mortality rate that's like 0.01%, that's God forbid 100 people. But it really could be much worse. So that's kind of overshadowing everything. So not much going down. Just back to lockdown. But I've had a lot of insights this week. Me and Jennifer were messaging, and in terms of the multiple truth hypothesis, and somewhat the COVID-19, there's blessings in disguise, and to just be able to think and ponder hours and hours, every day. I look forward, I literally just pace back and forth for hours and hours every day. Sometimes, smoking weed, God forbid. But it's given me a large amount of time that I never would have thought I would have had to think about these theories that, I always knew were important, but you got to live life, and usually on the battlefield. But COVID-19 now going in for a period of time, there's the battlefield like Trump, Biden, but even that, it's just like watching news or something. It's not anything I could even be a part of, even as a keyboard warrior. But with that, me and Jennifer have a lot of interesting things to talk about. We have, I think, a guest that's going to come on, hopefully, Robert Lawrence, who was on Luke Ford this week, and he's got ideas about conspiracy theories and anti-Jewishness. And so if you're in the chat, Robert, or you're around, maybe I'll shoot you the link right after I do the chant. And, hopefully it's something interesting to see. I'm not sure if Jennifer had reached out or anyone reached out to her. If Aiken is around, pops in, he's more than welcome to share some updates on some of his expertise areas in Nimrista or machine learning or the direction of technology. So let Jennifer say anything she wants to say, and then try to do a good chant.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'll let Doooovid do the chant first. I think it puts the show, starts everything off on the right foot.
Okay, great. So I had been doing Hasidic tunes, and I had mentioned Kretschnoff, because when I first started in Jerusalem, one of the first tishes I went to was Kretschnoff, and it was probably purely location because where I was staying, if the direction, if I was walking towards the Hasidic section of Jerusalem, they were one of the first synagogues that I passed, and they sang like late into the night, hours and hours, and did a few of those tunes. So ironically, Chabad is really not that big in Jerusalem. Like in the section I was in, there was just a small Chabad synagogue. There was a library, a newly built funded library, actually funded by Gutnick from Australia, where you could go in and read Lubavitch books. Lubavitch was headquartered in Brooklyn, because it started in Russia, and the majority of the Chabad Hasidim that that built up into possibly even high tens of thousands of people up into World War II, largely went to Brooklyn, but all over the world. And today, when you say there's 4,000 Chabad rabbis all over the world, come mostly from these bloodlines of people who lived in the towns that were geographically under the rabbinic leadership of the Lubavitch rabbis, the Schneerson family, to now where you have Chabad as a movement of rabbis who had already now been around the world for a full generation, where you have many people that have grown up inside synagogues that had already been successfully established in towns all over the world. So in Jerusalem, the mainstay of a Rebbe, and people sing tunes like Nagunim, and it's more formal, and people are expected to kind of look at the Rebbe, the guru, and copy his actions and learn from his actions. So everybody just kind of like stands there, and the rabbi says some Torah and they sing some songs, but it's very directly focused on one individual. And Chabad also was like that, but in a less formal way. And so the gatherings, when the Hasidim chanted by Chabad, they had what they call Verbringing, and they still have it today. And it's not necessarily the same thing as a Hasidic Tish, but it's similar. And it could be the Rebbe himself, but it could just be a local rabbi. In terms of Chabad has thousands of rabbis that represent a movement, but are representatives of the Lubavitch Rebbe, the Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and they will have what's called the Verbringing, which is not as formal as having like a Rebbe presided Tish, and could lead to the partaking of many people, and usually actually has quite a bit of alcohol, being drunk, and people are encouraged to sometimes participate more than in a formal Hasidic setting. So in a Chabad setting, people who are just there participating and saying things, but that could also be in any Hasidic place. But they have one tune that is called the Verbringing Nigun, and Nigun in Hebrew just means the melody. And it's basically a 3-part nigun, and it's a theme and variation, kind of cute, catchy tune. And this, I guess, coupled with vodka and tradition, because Chabad came from the part of Russia where that was how Jews practiced the spirituality, Judaism, where we get together and we drink some vodka and we chant some tunes, and people would tell stories or spiritual motivation, and a rabbi might, people might gather the patience and attention to pay attention to a rabbi say over some important wisdom to the attention of everybody there. And chanting was a very important part of setting that mood. So this is a very famous Chabad tune, probably sang at all Chabad synagogues all over the world, and going back multiple generations. It's called the Verbringen Niggin. It's a simple 3-part tune. Yada da 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 da. Ay 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 da 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 ya. Yada da 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 da. Da 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 da. Yada da 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 da. Ay 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 da 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 ya. Ya da 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 dum da 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 dum ya da 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 dum ya da 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 dum ay ay ya da 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 dum ya da 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 dum ya da 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 dum ay ya da 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 dum. Yada da 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 yada da 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 dum yada da 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 dum. That would repeat, and that would usually go with like fist banging on a table, and in theory would create some sort of unity, I guess, where anybody there would feel comfortable to say their words. So if it was a gathering, people talking about the Rebbe, so the Rebbe loved all people, so anybody there after the chanting, saying like their experience with the Rebbe, and the chanting would validate the energy that the person might be able to sort of say speak to everybody. And that's very important in the spiritual ideas, and there's a lot of parallels to Hinduism, although the Hasidim generally was done with vodka. Children maybe it wouldn't, after a few rounds of just the chanting, like, because to somewhat like that's the cultish type thing, where you either look at people like you're crazy, what are you doing, and then you're not part of it, or you just start chanting and you say like, yeah, I'm part of it. So after a few rounds of like the yada da 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 dum, you either join or you don't. And presumably if it's proper for bringing and the energy, so to say, are right, anybody who's there is obviously going to take the opportunity to join, even if it was someone off the street who had never even heard of that before and just happened to have the experience of being there. And it's connected to the chanting experience, and it's actually probably the biggest part of it. Because if it was just an event and you say someone was off the street and it's like, oh, there's some rabbi speaking, it would be unlikely, but that someone would listen and concentrate in a way that they might take the spiritual ideas seriously. But the chanting really sets a tune for multiple factors. So that's an interesting theme and variation, simple tune. Any if you went to any Chabad synagogue, you would be likely over a period of going there, a period of time to hear that song.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing, and thanks to the audience for joining. Looking forward to the show today. Were we going to talk a little more about the Ed Dutton exchange?
Oh yeah, that's definitely an important thing to talk about. Yeah, we didn't even mention week in review, because I said it last week, and we had very good viewership, over 50 people. Unfortunately, Jennifer came late. I mean, she was there for the second half and had good 10-minute exchange with Professor Dutton. But yeah, so that was a good stream, interesting stream. It was a little awkward. That was really, and I also did my regular Thursday with Charles Moskowitz. That it's been pretty regular now. I don't even know how long I have to check. Maybe make a playlist or something like that. But Yeah, I don't know if you had any thoughts on Dutton or you want to talk about that.
Well, it's an interesting discussion. He sort of seemed to be like in the mode of giving a lot of interviews. So I don't want to say his responses were canned, but he seemed like habituated to having had given those answers many, many times in the past. So I'm not so sure how much he was listening to what you were saying, which was kind of too bad because it's always fun to actually develop the multiple truth approach where he sort of brings his truth and we bring our truth and we work to reconcile them in some way, but it didn't really was happening. And then I was sort of triggered over what he said about India. I didn't really appreciate it. It sort of seemed like a condescending colonialist, imperialist, kludge-headed perspective. So I tried my best to be as patient as I could be. As basically, I think I was all right.
Yeah, I guess I invited him on for a friendly interview. I wasn't going to, critique him or attack him. Maybe a little bit of his ideas on racial science, which he sounded more than fine with. But there was a disconnect, and to me, like I was expecting that because largely he's kind of a professional. He does it for money. Not saying like Doooovid's like some special figure who doesn't do it for money, but I'm not a professional. I'm an amateur. You could say I don't do it for money because no one of the right mind would pay me anyways. But me and Jennifer take a more spiritual approach. We would largely be rejected in the academy, even if we wanted to be. And despite he might have a few questions, controversies on his record, he's in academy. He's officially published, not like just JF, who has like 10 papers. He's published over 100 papers. He's got over 10 books, and he's a popular YouTuber, and he's got a style and personality. So he's an interesting guy to speak to. I'm not sure if he really did listen to me or if he cared what I was saying, and it seemed kind of like he was just talking to me because Yehuda Finkelstein paid him to, and there could have been other reasons. And honestly, I don't know. He's not required to inform me, and to some extent, I was honored and happy to talk to him. And if it was just like a Q&A, he came on my channel and did a Q&A and shared, and he seemed to understand a few of the things I told him about chess expertise or even a spiritual approach to anthropology. I mean, he's a smart man, and he was instantly able to understand some of my ideas. But yeah, I think there was a little bit of a disconnect, and he probably looked at it like he was coming on my channel to like do a Q&A. And he probably didn't really care that much about my or your ideas. And he's like I didn't invite him on my channel for me to lecture him on my ideas and get his reaction. So I wasn't expecting that. But I didn't know what to expect, and I had wanted to more plan it out, but he sounded like he didn't want to do it that way. I'd been willing to more straight out plan it out, where I was going to tell him like these papers and these ideas, and maybe even read straight from his papers, and we could discuss these things. And he preferred more to wing it, which is fine. But there was some interesting directions that me and Jennifer might talk about and even work together towards. And I don't know if that's why Yehuda Finkelstein paid Dutton to talk to me. What was so that me and Jennifer would try to break down some of these ideas, and not just his ideas, but ideas in general, into logical mathematical form. I mean, we've been talking about that on Week in Review for over a year now. I've mentioned and talked to JF about it, is that you're saying like any of these, and Dutton has papers about the unifications of the soft sciences. And me and Jennifer were going to talk about Bayesian analysis and relationship to the multiple truth hypothesis. But I was mentioning to Dutton, has he ever considered breaking, most of his ideas are basically simple correlations, where he's talking about certain factors that you could pull out in society, IQ, wealth, neurology, so things that could be tested in a certain way, and then statistical analysis used to make correlations, to draw some sort of meta analysis. And that's basically what me and Jennifer love doing. But me and Jennifer would like to take it significantly steps further, and that means statistical analysis to ordinary differential equations, and even breaking down these things into logical form. And in theory, the multiple truth hypothesis would help deconstruct these things so that they could be broken down into a logical form, and then have a statistical analysis conducted on that. So I think, just from speaking to Dutton, from me and Jennifer's research, it's interesting to take it that way. And, from the multiple truth hypothesis, like, yes, I mean, it's almost a theological school also, where everybody has something to contribute. So, I think me and Jennifer both agree, in theory, like, we are more than willing to work with everybody. We're not going to reject anybody, but people have to do work and bring serious ideas to the table.
Yeah. Yeah, people have to be, like, you can't be wedded to your axioms, right? So most people on some level, it's like, it's an identity thing. If they feel like if they drop the axioms, well, their sense of self is just going to disappear, So that's basically what I feel like we're contending with, that the level of complexity of the questions we're asking is removed from what most people are asking. Like, they can't even necessarily conceive of the questions that we pose here. So that seems to be like the biggest hurdle to me, is getting people to care.
Yeah, I heard Dr. Fauci giving the Swiss cheese example. Maybe you could use that for meta-analysis, but he was mentioning that the multiple strategies, and if you do one strategy, it's like a piece of Swiss cheese. But if you put two pieces together of Swiss cheese, you'll still have a few overlaps and holes. Once you get 3, 4, 5 slices, you're probably going to have all the holes covered, but you're never going to be 100% in looking at that as strategies like wearing a mask, social distancing, testing, hand washing, hand sanitizer, each one of those as a layer. And from a machine learning meta level, like neural networks, where you're looking at deeper levels, where there's from the Hebraic Kabbalistic common idea called the Pardes, where you have a simple level that anybody on the surface could see, but deeper levels of multiple spiritual meanings. So a Judaic simple understanding of multiple truth hypothesis, because all Judeo-mysticism has a concept of there being deeper spiritual meaning behind things that could be a multiplicity of meanings. And then an analysis of Dutton, in saying, like, yeah, there's real trends out there that you could point out, and they're conflicting from a soft science of correlations, like Seinfeld. You ever notice that people act strange in a common way, that there's a commonality to the strangeness of people? And then you could correlate that strangeness, and it's related to the hard problem of consciousness, because presumably the mind does that. Whether the social science is true or not in a scientific way is a theory from consciousness, saying, is the mind or machine that makes these calculations? And also this concept that I think Jennifer will intuitively understand it, but it's going to take a little work. Maybe we could go through some examples this week and next week, is why I'm doing the chess analysis. And so thankfully Queen's Gambit is remaining pretty popular. So, maybe talking about chess won't be so abstract for people. But the concept of expert class skill levels that are discernible, and then there's um, curriculum of understanding enlightenment levels, realizations that it takes for people to advance through certain skill levels. And chess just happens to be a very well studied game that's been played for a long period of time with a well kept record. And even the most popular TV show in the world right now is about chess. However, this concept of skill levels and breaking down the patterns that it takes to understand complex ideas is really what these neural networks or complex layers is about, where you have
Okay, so
these.
can I just hop in with the chess thing? I'm not even sure if you even asked this exactly, but I'm going to pretend you asked the question, why do I like chess as a metaphor for these ideas? And I speculate two reasons. One is that chess is essentially a game, and all games are based on estimating statistics, a statistical probability that your move will be contributing to you winning. So it's always about a sort of game theoretic estimation of your odds. You know, when you're playing poker and you're like, how many aces does he have? Type thing. So it's like fun and relatable because, like, who doesn't know what chess is, right? And the other thing is that it's a system that has a finite basis. It's an informational system with a finite basis, but an infinite number of permutations. Because there's such a thing as a stalemate, right? It's possible to end up in a sort of cycle of moves that technically never ends, which is diagnosed as a stalemate, right? So finite basis, how do we know it's a finite basis? Because it's a finite board, which means the number of hypothetical microstates is bounded by the size of the board, but it turns out there's infinity microstates. So the way we can take the chess metaphor into the real world is to realize that how is the chess encoding information? You can think of it like a vector, right? And what the vector is telling us is the subsequent positions on the chessboard of all the pieces, right? So how do we store that vector? Well, actually, what's the more natural way to store that vector? Because we could store it in a string, but that's kind of very impractical, geometrically speaking, because it's not actually a linear system. It's a board, which makes it a planar system. So we want to think about integrating the fact that it's planar, what exactly we'd be modeling with a chess-like approach, and use the chessboard as a metaphor for the universe, which is also a finite basis with infinity permutations, as like a help. It could help us to visualize the thermodynamic microstates, but it would be a more generalized application of thermodynamic microstates. Because right now what we have is we can apply it to like a few things that are more abstract than gases and stuff, but mostly it's just applied to gases. But we could generalize that if we actually understood what the quanta were. So I think chess is intuitive in the sense that it is an infinite permutation set with a finite basis, and so is our own universe. Sorry about the ramble. I just really wanted to share that.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. It was only semi-related to the point I was making about skill levels in the that when people approach chess or play chess, you could largely classify them in an objective skill level, and you could determine the type patterns that they know or don't know that places them in that skill level. And it's somewhat esoteric because it's a game of chess, but it's also largely geometric. So if you're like a chess coach or something and you have a student and you're looking at their game, you could see relatively quickly weaknesses in their game, why they're losing games, why they're not doing as well as possible, and then break it down like the opening, the middle game, the end game, the certain attack strategy, or various things that will improve their game, and estimate these are the key components, which is part of expertise at chess. And from the path of novice to expertise, there's going to be various skill levels. And in order to reach those skill levels, a person needs to achieve various realizations. And in essence, that's the theory of Freemasonry. I mean, Freemasonry is a system in a religion and having degrees versus just a theoretical system of initiations and degrees that is directly related to a factual skill level and level of realization and functionability within society. So with that, it's very related to machine learning and neural networks and patterns behind patterns behind patterns. Because what does the higher skill level see? They see the same thing that the lower skill level sees largely, but they see something deeper.
At a lower resolution, right? They may
Well,
be
there's
different
multiple
resolution.
ways to depict that, but by saying that the people at a higher skill level see largely everything that the people at the lower skill level see, and they see a deeper level of understanding that goes continuing. And the metaphor isn't necessarily correct when you try to break it down to a neuro analysis of how the brain actually works, or a mathematical model of for how thought might form. But from a conceptualized concept of AI estimations of solving the hard problem of consciousness, that patterns form a deeper level of patterns that reveal a more useful set of information, and below those patterns you have deeper patterns and deeper patterns, and that could be understood in expertise levels of where you have people that attempt and do the same things at various levels of expertise. And that's really like math and the sciences and engineers and even sports, and Dutton and like IQ, because we were supposed to talk more about IQ, but in the measurement of activities and ascribing it a number. And hopefully we're going to talk about Bayesian analysis quite a bit, and the idea of truth coming from some sort of statistical method, because ultimately you're not going to be able to reduce it to this is the truth. One, you're going to have a difficult time deciphering the truth. You might have multiple possibilities that conflict with each other that are both useful, or you might have a whole bunch of things that provide useful information, and then a whole bunch of phenomena that are unexplained. Or however, I'll pass it to Jennifer in a second, because she might have prepared and even explained this better than me. But you need some, I'm calling it the multiple truth hypothesis. But today we're going to go over the most popular mathematical statistical method called the Bayesian analysis. And largely Bayesian analysis and various forms of that is what is at the center of almost all of science. Even the hard sciences like quantum physics largely gets to a point where, due to uncertainty, in order to understand at a deeper level, that is done through statistical analysis, not through some sort of direct derivation of this is the answer.
Yeah, I did want to go into it, but I really wasn't sure where to start, because I've never really been able to memorize that method due to feeling that it was not pure enough. I just can't do it. So it's still a bit confusing what exactly the method's even trying to say, but it strikes me as something that compounds axiomatic errors. Because, how do you know if there's a problem in the axioms of your hypothesis? Because it's basically not in a position to know, is it?
Well, it basically distributes. Basically, all Bayesian analysis does is distributes in various methods to provide the most accuracy, the uncertainty. And really, that's all any statistical method does, is saying we have large amounts of uncertainty, and we're going to use some sort of statistical method to distribute and estimate the uncertainty, and say, yes, the uncertainty is still there, but there's more uncertainty in certain cases and less uncertainties in other cases. I don't know if we have to look and talk about it. Maybe I'll read some articles to understand the current lexicon, or speak of the people who do this, but Bayesian analysis it's a huge technique. Almost every field, you'll have papers and Bayesian analysis of I don't. Did you prepare any screenshots? Did like that article of Bayesian analysis losing in court, if it had the basic equation or even just the Wikipedia? But the simple level of Bayesian analysis is really just like a simple algebraic equation, and all it does is distribute risk, and it's actually ironically used for vaccines and medicines for Dr. Fauci this week in the vaccines, and Bayesian analysis for like efficacy and for these false tests, false positives and negative positives. That's one of like the basic uses of Bayesian analysis. So if you're taking a mathematics course and you come to Bayesian analysis, a lot of times the examples that will be given will be the case of false and negative positives for diseases. So I don't know if anyone in the chat, obviously Aiken would know a whole bunch about Bayesian analysis, and if he definitely wants to come on, we're happy to jabber. And that guy Robert.
Did you send him the link? Because you could send it to him anytime. Yeah, I mean.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to send Robert the link, and then we might take a break talking about mathematics. But that if you could explain the equation if
that's what I'm saying. Like I legit don't get it. I don't understand the premise. It seems that this theorem would not hold if one caused the other. So it seems like A and B have to meet certain criteria before this theorem could even dream about being applied. But then practically speaking, like, is it really possible to find complex uncorrelated variables given that everything is entangled is one of the axioms of my system? I just feel very cognitively dissonant trying to assimilate this theory. Like if you asked me to teach this theory right now, I legit couldn't. I could
but just explain the simple probability. The probability, A to B is the probability of B to A times the probability of A divided by the probability of B.
Hey, so, can you hear me right now?
Oh, hi, Robert. Thanks for joining the show. Nice to meet you. I'm Jen.
Nice to meet you, Jen. I'm Paul. Oh, actually, that's my real name. I let that slip. I changed my name on my YouTube account because my mom was concerned about privacy, but I still haven't said my last name, so that's okay. But you can hear me too, Doooovid, right?
You're coming through just fine.
Okay.
Yeah, we appreciate you. I saw you on Luke this week, and you mentioned Charles Moskowitz, and I've been on his show. I'm not sure if you've seen me before, but you talk about things that we talk about. So I figured I'd invite you on. And I told Jennifer you sounded pretty safe. Like last week, we had a guy who like pulled the gun, and every other word out of his mouth was a curse word. But you sounded pretty.
I took the video down. Like I took the video off the stream before he pulled the gun and said all those horrible words. So I feel like overall, it was a failed attempt for him, and we succeeded. But yeah, I'm sure you have a YouTube channel, right? So you're familiar with the terms of service. So
yes, I have a YouTube channel, and I've uploaded some videos on it. So you saw my interview on Luke Ford's show, Doooovid, is that correct?
Yeah, and I guess I'm a Jew who argues against counter-Semites. That's what I do. I enjoy. I'm a civil engineer. I studied in rabbinic school and active in the Jewish community, but I enjoy arguing with counter-Semites, and I largely believe in spiritual forces and largely in the Jewish religion. And this show, Week in Review, me and Jennifer, like psychoanalysis. We also have Hindu leanings and talk about the hard problem of consciousness and just how people put together information, how people form ideas. And if you take like a blank slate or however you look at people's knowledge, the world is a very difficult place to decipher, and people advance in the world by recognizing patterns, recognize the correct patterns or not. So conspiracy theories is natural, and even conspiracy theories about the Jewish people. And for a believing Jew, you could say conspiracy theories is validation of our own religion. There's different ways of looking at it, or conspiracy theories in general. So I'm happy to have you on. I don't know if you want to spend a few minutes introducing yourself, just whatever bio information you feel safe with.
Well, I don't care to share biographical information, but I'd like to justify my viewpoint. I don't.
If you want to even give your viewpoint, just introduce something like who you are, what's your idea? What's your theory?
I don't want to say too much about myself because I'm worried about being doxxed. But in terms of, you were saying that you were disagreeing with me about conspiracy theory being anti-Jewish, and you were disagreeing with my finding it sinister. So I wanted to justify those two claims. Well, I find conspiracy theory sinister, not because I think that Jews are innocent. I think a lot of the things people say about Jews, accuse them of, are true. It is true Jews are sponsoring massive immigration to Western countries in order to reduce ethnic Europeans to minorities in their own lands. And most Jews are supporting that. That's true. Like in the 1965 Immigration Act, it was Jewish organizations and Jews who were at least one of the major factors in pushing that law that changed America's immigration policy to having more open borders. And it's also true that Jewish Zionists are pushing for America to inordinately support Israel. A lot of the allegations made against Jews are true. So my intention was not to defend Jews, but I find the conspiracy theory movement sinister because it's based on this spiritualist worldview that that our objective reality is false, and that it was created by an evil, malicious God, Jehovah, the God of Jewry, and that Jewry are his human servants who are enforcing this spiritual deception on mankind. And the only way to get out of this evil material world that Jehovah created is to overthrow Jewry and institute this spiritualist regime that would venerate the opposite of Jehovah. So they take the I don't really believe in religion, but they take the Garden of Eden story and they invert it and have the serpent as the good guy, and they have Jehovah as the bad guy, and Jehovah is maliciously concealing spiritual truth from humanity, and the serpent is nobly telling Eve to eat of the apple. Like Hannah Newman in the chapter I was reading from describes the view here. The serpent in the garden. In the Jewish Bible, the creature who sabotaged man's paradise by tempting Eve to transgress God's command. He was justly punished for his act, as were Adam and Eve for their disobedience. In Christianity, the same, and/or Satan's first appearance in human history as tempter and deceiver, directly causing mankind to be infected with the congenital sin problem. Man must be redefined as the heroic... No, sorry, I misread that. This serpent must be redefined as the heroic Lucifer who offered godhood to mankind in the Lemurian age. Their acceptance was not a fall, but an ascension. The Jews hopelessly muddled the story and transmitted it as the first sin, while Christians used the Jewish story to portray man as sinful and unworthy. Both versions short-circuit the path to godhood and slander the God of humanity. So Hannah Newman was comparing the Judeo-Christian view of the serpent in the Garden of Eden story to the New Age Gnostic conspiracy theorist view. And this is from her chapter, New Age Views on Jewry, from her book, The Rainbow Swastika, A Report to Jewry on New Age Anti-Semitism. So that book by Hannah Newman is summarizing her concerns with the New Age movement, and she thinks it's anti-Jewish. And I don't agree with her that the whole movement is anti-Jewish. The majority isn't, but there's a small but significant minority of them who are anti-Jewish. And conspiracy theorists like Adam... Oh, actually, I want to read another thing she wrote. She wrote it in the introduction to the book, because that would help me explain my view. She wrote a brief statement in the introduction. I think it was 1 or 2 sentences that would help me explain my view. So I'm going to find that now and read that. In the introduction, she wrote, "In a nutshell, the New Age is a political and religious movement which seeks to unite the world under the guidance of non-human spirits, in the process singling out Judaism and eventually the Jewish people for destruction. One of the new things about the New Age is a human race purged of all Jewish presence." I don't agree with her that that's what all the New Age is about, because a lot of New Agers are Jews and a lot of them are Freemasons. Most of them aren't about that, but there's a small but significant minority of them, the New Age conspiracy theorists, who have that objective. Like Adam Green is an example. Christopher Bjerknes is another example. I would say Alex Jones is an example, although he's kind of started pretending not to be anti-Jewish. And another example would be David Icke, who she wrote about a sentence about him that I think would help me explain my view in another chapter, Nazism and the New Age. She wrote, "The best personal example of neo-Nazi ideology merged with New Age thought is David Icke, former BBC commentator turned Green Party activist and son of the Godhead guru, whose seminars are crowded with New Agers and neo-Nazis alike. Likewise, the British magazine Rainbow Arc and the Australian periodical Nexus, which Icke recommends to his followers. For a good overview of David Icke, see From Green Messiah to New Age Nazi, Left Green Perspectives, January 1996. Note the quotes by Icke, many of which are almost verbatim Bailey teachings." And that was from Hannah Newman's chapter, Nazism and the New Age. And Icke is very influenced by Alice Bailey. She was a New Age writer who wrote several books, and she claimed they were being telepathically communicated to her by a spirit named Joel Kuhl. And they contained a lot of rants against Jewry, and they were arguably more extreme than Hitler's, because Hitler only viewed Jews as racial enemies of Germans, while Bailey viewed Jews as spiritually evil and as forces of darkness. She talked about them serving a group of evil spirits called the Black Lodge. And I'd like to quote her views on the Black Lodge.
Well, before you, I don't want to. I mean, we didn't have. You don't have to read a whole bunch of stuff. I want like a more general, like, why should I care to hear all this stuff? And you know, what is this related to? Just one person's conspiracy theories, or you're saying that these conspiracy theories are behind less, you know, I don't even want to call it malevolent conspiracy theories, or are you just talking about you know some like school of anti-Semitic conspiracists?
I'm saying the general conspiracy theory movement is about this. Like Adam Green, you've been on Adam Green's show. I've seen you on his show, and I've seen you debate Christopher Bjerknes. Those two conspiracy theorists are definitely
But
about.
you're calling it a movement. You're saying what is the conspiracy?
Well, like,
or you're saying anti-Judaism is what makes it a movement? And
no, like QAnon, for example, they're an example of this conspiracy theory movement. And QAnon, in their book QAnon and the Thousand,
you demonstrate movement. What do you mean?
Like a part of how Donald Trump was elected. I'm not saying Trump is anti-Jewish. I think in many ways he's a puppet of Jews, and he's done Israel's bidding more than any other president. So I'm not saying he personally is anti-Jewish, but a large part of how he was elected is he was supported by right-wing anti-Jewish conspiracy theorists. A lot of his base are right-wing anti-Jewish conspiracy theorists, even though there is truth to the statement some right-wing anti-Semites make that he's a puppet of Jews. There is truth to that, but that doesn't change the fact that his rhetoric makes him popular with anti-Jewish conspiracy theorists, like his ranting against George Soros, for example, in his having previously promoted the conspiracy theory that vaccines cause autism, although he's obviously stopped doing that now. And Trump was elected partly because of the support of these conspiracy theorists, and QAnon support him fanatically. And QAnon, in their book QAnon and the 1,000 Years of Peace, they talk about global Messiah coming to humanity. And
we don't need a book report on conspiracy theory, but you know, I mean, I also heard on Luke Ford you were mentioning that you thought the combination of these opposite forces behind Trump would be some sort of death cult. But I mean, we don't need like a book report on all these various conspiracies. I was looking.
one thing. It's a specific thing someone said. It's not a lengthy statement that I think supports what I said. Patrick Little, who ran for the Senate in California, I think you've interacted with him because I believe I've seen you on
Brundle. I mean, it's not up on YouTube anymore, but yeah. We had a conversation.
I want to quote a brief statement he made. It's not.
Although,
long.
I mean, to note, in our conversation, both me and Patrick agreed that there was an external spiritual divine force that was causing him to do this, that it wasn't just a belief in a conspiracy theory.
Wait, causing who to do it? Causing Patrick Little to do it?
Well, I asked him if he thought, and he said yes, that there was some extra material force that was pushing him to do this. Not
okay,
just.
I just want to quote this brief statement he made. He made it in this video is still up. It's titled "Patrick Little for Senate: No More News with Adam Green." It was published May 24th.
These people have all gotten kicked off of YouTube, so
Yeah, there's no reason for you to
such a
quote this
wise
stuff.
idea to be pushing such a.
This
we don't need a book report. It's just going to put
as evidence for what I'm saying about this dialogue.
Yeah, we don't need to give the evidence or something. It's not necessary to put it on YouTube or whatever and saying we know what these people say. I've spoken with them. You don't need to repeat their talking points.
But it's not an inflammatory statement. Like there's nothing about like the most inflammatory things he said. It's not. I want to make it to provide evidence of the dialectic because
I'm saying we know this stuff. You're not providing evidence. You're just giving a report of stuff I've already.
I'll say it in my own words then. He said that he was glad Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem because it will make people pissed off at Israel. That's what he said, and that seems to support what I'm thinking because an anti-Zionist conspiracy theorist, Patrick Little, is glad that Trump moved the embassy in Jerusalem, which also is something that pleases Jewish Zionist fanatics. So it's like both sides are working to have this end times conflict. That is all I was going to quote. It wasn't a particularly inflammatory statement. That's all I was going to say was that Little said that, and that seems to support what I'm thinking that that Trump's administration works. It helps further this end times death call of two opposing forces: Jewish Zionist fanatics on one side, anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish, and anti-Masonic conspiracy theorists like Adam Green, Christopher Bjerknes, and Alex Jones on the other side. That's what I was getting at.
Yes, I mean. Yeah. I mean, I agree with your assessment. I guess we are trying to analyze it from a deeper level, or look at larger forces or a scientific model of cognitive processes. That so obviously people have to put patterns together in order to live. The brain, by definition, is just like a pattern solving machine that solves patterns whether we want our mind to or not, and that people will put patterns together in false ways is obvious, and that people will try to share that. Well, people will believe that the pattern that they discovered is correct even though it's not, is also well, it's obvious. And you say, okay, that's a conspiracy theory, and that those theories that people come up with in their mind and think are correct, that they'll try to share to others and even convince them. Obviously, that's a natural process of human nature, and to call something nefarious, we're saying this pattern is a dangerous pattern because it's false, and it could be dangerous to other people. So I mean, I generally dispute the concept of conspiracy theory in general, and a nefarious nature to it in a way, and a question like free will of a person. Did they have an active decision-making point where, saying what Patrick Little, was he reading this literature and he could have decided this is wrong and go against it, or there was no free will, that he read the book and it overtook him and forced him to act in a certain way. And you're saying if he just realized that he was wrong, he would just change his course of action. Or even a Doovidian, possibly religious Jewish perspective is no, I mean, I am a believer in the Bible. I am a believer in the prophets, and what you tell me does not surprise me at all. Of course, the Christians think that something different is going to happen than the Jews think is going to happen when Messiah at the end of the days. I'm not concerned about this. Yes, the ultra-Orthodox Jews support Trump, thinking that we're going to get to rebuild our temple. Yes, we fully expect President Trump, if he's a man and lives up to his promise, we demand that he help us rebuild our temple with his last minutes in the White House. But the Christians do not think that, and the fact that we both get behind the same man is not surprising at all to me. It's just coalition politics. You have to work together to make progress. So obviously, I mean, it's like, what new are you saying? What new are you adding? Who didn't know? Who hasn't done interfaith, like Jewish Christian interfaith? Like hasn't heard what you're saying.
But could I just interject something? I want to read a short report. It's only 5 sentences that a CNN liberal Jewish reporter named Hadassah did about how Jews are being chased out of Western Europe. She said, "This is a really alarming study. As we've seen a rise in anti-Jewish attacks in Europe, the European Union decided to survey more than 27,000 young Jews between age 16 and 34 to see how they feel about being Jewish in Europe. And the results are depressing. They said about 44% said they experienced anti-Jewish harassment. That's 12% more than their elders. 41% said they've considered leaving Europe because of anti-Jewish fears. And 45% have said they have chosen not to wear Jewish symbols for fear of being harassed. And what we have seen in the past few years in Europe is that these are not just fears that Jews feel. There are tangible results. There have been tangible increases in anti-Jewish attacks in France and in Germany. Obviously, Europe has a sad history of anti-Semitism with the Holocaust, of course, and CNN's work shows that 1 in 5 Europeans feel that anti-Semitism is brought on by Jewish actions. So my point in quoting what Hadassah Gold said there is that Jews are being chased out of Western Europe, and that's just very weird because Jews are the most privileged group in most Western European countries. They own most of the news media in most Western European countries, and they have great influence on the political parties in most Western European countries. So it should be impossible that they're being chased out of Western Europe, yet it's happening. Anti-Jewish sentiment has become widespread enough that Jews are feeling harassed into leaving Western Europe. So that supports my idea that there's a dialectic of Jews versus anti-Jews that plays into an end times death call, because it's very suspicious that it's possible to force Jews out of Western Europe when they're the most.
Are you saying the Bible is this end times death cult? Or are you saying there's some sort of like Doooovid? I opened up the song, this stream, with a chant from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and yeah, many Jews think that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was, possibly a messianic figure in our day. And are you saying that that's a messianic death cult because we believe in the Torah and the prophecies that are put in it, and those books include prophecies that God forbid warn about the destruction of the majority of humanity? Or you think that there's some separate like satanic death cult or I don't understand. You're using words and also you're kind of ignoring the basic what about the Bible? Like of course the Bible mentions that there might be war and great catastrophe at the end of days.
I'm not saying that the Bible itself is a death cult or that the Talmud is either. I'm saying that there are within Judaism, the Jewish religion has been infiltrated by people who want an end times death cult. I don't think this was part of the Bible or the Talmud, but like people like the Frankists and the Chabadians infiltrated Judaism to bring about the Jewish end of this dialectic. And
it seems your thesis is based on a slight misunderstanding of basic Judeo theology, in the sense that yes, I want Mashiach now, I want Messiah now, even though the Kabbalists warn that you're trying to bring Messiah too quickly could have negative repercussions. And from any Judeo-Christian or even Islamic many world traditions, that yes, we want the redemption immediately, but unfortunately, if the redemption comes and people are not ready for it, there could be punishment, there could be mass death, there could be war.
Yes,
so
but
but that's a basic of theology. I mean, that's written in the Bible. Any person who takes the Bible seriously is going to have to make do with those passages.
I think you're straw manning me because I didn't claim the Bible or the Talmud were part of the end times death cult. I was saying that this was a later thing that later Jewish heretics started. That was not. I don't think Orthodox
Is
Judaism.
that a death cult mean because people are looking forward to death and the destruction of humanity?
Or I recently
They're acting purposely towards it. That like Doooovid here and like even
I can go in.
enjoying my exotic dried fruit and fine.
I'm not saying that. I read a biography of Jacob Frank recently by Paweł Maciejewski called Jacob Frank and the Frankists. He talked in the book about how different Jews, opposing factions in Jewry, both ranted against each other and condemned each other as the Erev Rav, which is a Jewish term meaning mixed multitude. And they thought the Erev Rav were false Jews who had Egyptian admixture from the time Jews were in Egypt, and they practiced sorcery and Satanism and sexual perversion.
Yeah, but we know who the Erev Rav is, man. Like, I don't need your.
But your audience might not know. I'm saying it for their benefit.
Yeah, but I mean, our audience would more appreciate the brevity. I'm saying, like, yeah, if you want, like this week in review.
I'll get to the point.
We encouraging your scholarship here, but it's saying like this week in review.
I get it. I was making it too long. My point is, there are prophecies like in the Zohar that talk about the Erev Rav being destroyed. There's a verse in the Zohar, I don't remember where it was specifically. It says, it is the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, who made the world into waste and void. But as soon as the Messiah, blessed be he, comes, he will exterminate them and wipe them off the face of the earth. And also, long before the Holocaust happened, there were prophecies. People were warning Jews that they were going to be mass murdered because of their promotion of communism, and that they should ask the Jews to stop promoting communism, if not for the sake of their victims, at least for the sake of themselves, to prevent a future punishment of them. And I have a book summarizing that. It's a collection of these. Can you see it on the screen? It's a collection of these articles that predicted it. It's edited.
I have that book.
Well, I think Christopher Bjerknes is a crackpot, and I don't respect him, but the articles are all accurate. So the fact that there were these prophecies of a mass murder of Jews long before the Holocaust happened, I think is very suspicious. I don't think Hitler was controlled opposition, but
God forbid. I mean, it's saying like the Bible starts with Moses. Moses himself says that.
No, but I was going to explain what I wanted to explain what I meant when I said it.
I mean, God forbid, you were saying like suffering, but it's saying the God of the Jews is a God that deals harshly with sin.
I want to make another point, and I can make it quickly. Hitler was not controlled opposition. I reject Christopher Bjerknes's belief that he was, but I think that there were people in his government who did not share his agenda and were motivated by a different agenda. I'm not saying they were working for Jews, but I think they had an agenda other than his. One of these, the best example I can think of, two of the best examples, Heinrich Himmler and Alfred Rosenberg. They both had weird Gnostic, New Age, pagan beliefs and seemed to prioritize those over German nationalism. And Alfred Rosenberg, in his book, The Myth of the 20th Century, explicitly endorsed the Messianist version of Gnosticism, which held that Jehovah, the God of Jewry, was evil, and the material world he created was evil. So I think Rosenberg's agenda and Himmler's might have been a Gnostic spiritual war against Jewry rather than sincere German nationalism, and they infiltrated the Nazi party to carry out
rather than a book report on what all these various people thought. You saying, are you a believer? Are you a dualist? Do you believe that there's spiritual forces?
I think spirits exist, so in a sense there are spiritual forces, but I don't subscribe to either Judaism or Christianity or any other Abrahamic religion or to Gnosticism. I think there are probably malicious spirits who influence people like Patrick Little. I would be inclined to think
the origin of ideas, that the idea exists and somehow it's going to be manifested in a certain percentage of humanity, and these are the people that it's manifested in. Or a concept of even anti-Semitism or war, the cycle of birth and death itself is that things cycle and build up to a crescendo and repeat, and even that there's natural processes of pattern making and of suffering and of a mass tolerance to suffering, and even to a spiritual force. So the origin of these divisions between forces. So you mentioned that all these various authors and people that have these various ideas, and what does it matter that they have these ideas? And so it's you're going to call them conspiracy theories. So if they're just conspiracy theories and they're not true, but then you're going to validate them power. You're going to say that there could be power to something that's not true because you believe that that your understanding of human nature is that people could act on these untruths. So it's in your idea that it could be that whatever bound these people together, if it be the Nazis or whatever group or actions you're referring to, was just some false idea that one person somehow convinced other people to do. And so we can review. Me and Jennifer take a much more cognitive approach on these issues, and you got to come down to like free will. What is your opinion on free will?
You're saying that I'm wrong to worry about these people because they're just irrelevant crackpots. I don't agree with you.
I even question the point whether I had OV, this guy I had a debate with, and ironically, he's the neo-Nazi and I'm the Jew, and I said ideas are not dangerous. He said my ideas are dangerous. The reason why he's an anti-Jewish activist, God forbid, is because he thinks that my ideas are dangerous and he needs to stop me. And I said I did not think ideas were dangerous, and God forbid, I don't mind him and his ideas. Like if he comes to harm, so even at that point, you have to first come to So you're saying that ideas could be harmful.
Yes. Well, it depends. So if you have an idea that it's okay to have mass shootings and somebody suggested allowing it and there were a possibility of it happening, that would be a bad idea. That ideas can, that probably
scientifically, you don't know whether ideas could lead to action. And the current most research in neuroscience might demonstrate that there's a disconnect between the narrative and ideas and the actual action, that you can't actually prove that ideas lead to action. So I'm making that point on you that scientifically there's something called the hard problem of consciousness, and you can't actually demonstrate that ideas lead to action.
Ideas
think like Pavlov and his what scientific study have you read that ideas lead to actions?
Every action you take is determined by ideas in your mind. So
what scientific study? You're talking about your own personal introspection, or you're saying something that's a given? It's something so obvious that you could quote.
Yeah, so obvious that nobody has tried to prove it. Obviously, if you murder somebody, you had to have the idea to murder him before you carry out the murder. Saying ideas don't impact action is a preposterous statement.
All these things are scientifically disputed. And so if you haven't read the studies, you haven't read the studies, and that's fine.
Wait, let me ask you a question. Do you think animals have consciousness or no?
Well, me personally, yes, obviously.
Well, the only reason to believe animals have consciousness is if you think that a person's physical actions are determined by ideas in his mind. There's no other.
I mean, axiom. If your axiom is that consciousness pervades all of the universe, then animals and everything within the universe has consciousness.
I remembered something Freud said that's relevant in this context. He said, consciousness makes each of us aware only of his own state of mind. That others too possess a consciousness is an inference which we draw by their observable actions and utterances in order to make this behavior of theirs intelligible to us. It would no doubt be more psychologically correct to put it this way, that without any special reflection on our part, we attribute to everyone else our own understanding and therefore our consciousness as well, and that this identification is a necessary condition of our understanding. This identification or inference was originally extended by the human ego to animals, inanimate objects, the plants, the world at large, and other humans. It proved serviceable so long as their identification with the ego was overwhelmingly great.
Are you reading from something then?
No, I'm saying it from memory, but it grew less trustworthy as the difference between the ego and these others widened. Today, our critical scientific judgment is already in doubt on the question of consciousness in animals. We refuse to admit it in plants, and we relegate its belief in inanimate matter to mysticism. But even where that original identification has withstood scrutiny, that is, where the others are our fellow men, this identification rests upon an inference and cannot share the immediate certainty which we have of our own consciousness. So in other words, Freud was saying the reason we know that other people have consciousness is by observing their behavior, by observing their actions. We assume that those actions come from conscious mental states. So obviously, people's actions are determined by their mental states. So ideas do cause actions. It's self-evidently false to say ideas don't cause actions.
Jennifer?
Yeah, exactly. It's like we would have to start at the axioms, because you can't just invoke Freud. Like, to me, invoking Freud is actually weakening your position.
I think Freud was a crackpot. I have no respect for him, but what he said in this case was correct. It's so obviously correct that I was willing to quote someone I despise as much as him to make the point. I wouldn't quote him except on something this obvious.
I don't actually think it's an obvious assertion. The way I understand what you just said is that the reason we think other people are consciousness is because we're superimposing our perceptions of our own consciousness on them and assuming that they have the same motives as we do.
But you've never okay, the only way a person could take an action without his own consciousness determining it would be like if some other entity were telepathically communicating with that person.
Whoa. Here's what I can see from what you're saying is that you need to decide where ideas come from in the first place, because you have basically two opinions on that. They could be constructed from subjectivized consciousness, or they could be discovered from objectivized archetypes, or perhaps some third option that I've not yet thought of. So the result of all this logical reasoning that we're doing is going to turn largely on which of those axioms we choose.
My idea of where ideas come from would well, I haven't read much of Spinoza, but I've read summaries of him. I would probably, if the summaries are accurate, I'd probably agree with his idea, which is free will is logically impossible, and ideas just flow into consciousness and they determine actions, but the person does not truly choose his ideas. I'm not saying people freely will their ideas.
That's actually two different questions. Free will and the origin of ideas being objective or subjective are two different questions. I'm glad that you're interested in both of them, but it's important not to conflate them.
Fine, but
because whether or not ideas start objectively or subjectively doesn't actually change whether you're free to choose ideas.
I didn't say it does. I agree it doesn't. I was just saying, I was trying to clarify that in case you thought I was saying people choose their ideas. I don't believe that, but I also think you have to have ideas to take action. So, and even if they could even come from another mind telepathically communicating with your mind, but that would still be some mind having ideas. You can't, like, books don't take actions. You don't see a book walking across a room on its own. Like maybe a ghost would move a book, but you won't see a book walking on its own, or like a vacuum cleaner is not going to take action.
Well, that's the hard problem of consciousness. That's trying to answer the question of what is it that makes us different because we're alive versus stuff that's not alive or inanimate. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you're wrong. I mean, books do take action. I'm saying books read me and then control me. I'm saying that you're saying ideas have power, and these books on the wall control me, and they manifest through Doooovid. And that's, your concept. You said that. You said ideas have power, so books do take actions.
I'm saying the physical book doesn't take actions.
It does, because the idea exists. I got the idea in the physical book. So if it weren't for that physical representation that had that idea written in it, it would not have led to Doooovid doing action. So that inanimate physical object was the direct cause of action. So therefore, it took action.
I have a question for you. I think I noticed a book.
But I didn't mean to get general. It just upset me so much when you said books don't take action. Yes, books do take action. I'm sorry.
I have a question for you that relates to what we're discussing. I think I see a book in your library by Richard Lynn, The Chosen People, A Study of Jewish Intelligence. It's on my left and your right. Am I right that you have that book?
Yeah, in fact, I pulled it off the shelf the other day to show it to Dr. Dutton, because Dutton had done many studies together with Richard Lynn.
Well, the reason I mentioned that book is so you're interested in human intelligence. If you're interested in human intelligence, then you must think that ideas do influence people, because intelligence is studying the mental processes in people that impact their behavior. So it would be inconsistent to think ideas don't matter, but that intelligence does matter. So your being interested in that book and thinking it's a relevant field of study is inconsistent with your claim to not believe that ideas impact human behavior.
Well, I'm in fact a dualist. I just think the origin of ideas is not in the material realm, but the spiritual realm. But you do some research into Doooovidism, no, that I'm like I decipher wisdom. I will get wisdom from atheists and people who have different worldviews, and adapt that information into my own worldview. But personally, I'm going to the stretch to make this point and carry through these arguments step by step with you. And a lot of the audience has seen both me and Jennifer do this many times before, to make this point and demonstrate the rationalism that Doooovid believes behind my own personal dualism, to embarrass you that you do in fact not know the origin of ideas, and that hence someone might say, Doooovid is probably right. The origin of ideas is not in the material realm, but the spiritual realm.
I don't think I said that the origin of ideas was in the material realm. My point wasn't about the ontology of ideas. It was that these ideas, the conspiracy theory movement, are dangerous. That was my point. I don't think it's relevant whether the ideas come from the material world or the spirit world.
What's the origin of the danger? You're saying that the danger arises from the idea, and that the origin of the idea is irrelevant.
I don't really know what the origin of the ideas is. It's possible.
Maybe the idea arises from the danger, and it's the other way around. The idea is a manifestation of the danger. The danger is not a manifestation.
Yeah, and
of the idea.
Doovid's not trolling here. It's just that when you go to examine these really sort of mysterious things, that the causality can sometimes be counterintuitive. So we have to sort of check.
I could give an analogy to show why this is an irrelevant question.
It's not irrelevant, because you have to trace back causality, and ultimately you have to ask, what is the final origin of all these ideas? Because then that's the only way to point the finger of responsibility for who promulgated the ideas in the first place.
It has some relevance, but it's not necessary. All right, I'm going to give an analogy to show why, in some respects, it's irrelevant. It has some relevance.
I just don't think you can do that unless you actually knew ad hoc something you don't know. You're saying, well, it doesn't matter. And I'm saying you can't establish that it doesn't matter.
Okay, if there's a person who's like a serial rapist, I don't really think it matters that much whether he's sexually attracted to his victims or he's doing it out of a desire for power, in terms of recognizing that he's a problem. Like, this is like if there were a serial rapist.
God forbid. I think it's just that's why I'm promoting my multiple truth hypothesis, but it's a frame of reference. All information and facts are relevant from a certain reference. So from the reference of what is going to be the verdict? The verdict's going to be the death penalty, and added or something like that, and all the excess information. But a factual karmatic imprint, all information, all action in the material realm leaves a karmatic imprint that has significance and causes some sort of reaction.
Hey, actually,
do you accept those principles, or you don't believe in the basic law of karma?
I believe there are spirits in some. There might be
spirits. I meant karma.
I answer your
action, reaction, a greater.
I don't believe in karma. Like, I don't believe like if you murder somebody, you're going to get some kind of karmic debt imposed on you in this world, maybe in a future life. But I don't.
You're a JF nihilist where you think that these are subjective human constructs, evolutionary, whatever. Like I told Dutton, suffering, scientifically, there's absolutely nothing wrong with suffering. God forbid, scientifically, there's absolutely nothing wrong with death. There's no scientific reason to prefer death over life. That's not the purpose of science, and science could not give you any reason within its own boundaries to say that it's better that someone doesn't suffer than that they do suffer, or that someone lives than that they don't live.
I was not saying that I rejected objective morality. I was saying that I reject the idea in Eastern religions like Buddhism and Hinduism that when you commit evil acts, you accumulate karma where you're punished for it in spiritual ways.
So now I'm going to ask you about reincarnation. Okay,
Karma
like I was going to get to
cause and
reincarnation, but like I assume that means you don't believe in that.
I think you're strawmanning karma, because karma just means cause and effect. So yeah, there's a lot of misrepresentations of what that means, i.e. getting punished by some all-powerful entity is a misrepresentation of cause and effect. But do you agree that we live in a universe governed by laws of cause and effect?
Maybe, okay, fine. Maybe karma is true. I don't know enough about it, but
because karma is true doesn't mean you have to agree with every interpretation of karma out there, right?
Well, we do have cause and effect. I think that's indisputable. I don't dispute that there's cause and effect. I was kind of disputing what I thought he was looking at as cause and effect. But the point about the origin of these ideas, the idea that we have to find out the origin of these ideas before we determine what to do about them. That would be like, to use a slightly different analogy from my first one, it would be like if there was a child sexual abuser on trial, and instead of focusing on his factual guilt or innocence, the trial was about whether he was a pedophile in the sense of being sexually attracted mostly or only to children.
Let me jump in with something. Okay, so if you want to know the effect of ideas, regardless of where they come from, you have to understand the mechanics of how those ideas propagate. And so the question is what actually controls what ideas are promulgated? Is it possible or even desirable to do that?
Well, let me mention one of
in order to make an argument, you need to say somehow objective to what it is that's being said, that you can draw this. To what the thought is, which I don't see how you can possibly.
Right, I do have some evidence. I have some evidence for a sinister spiritual origin of some of the conspiracy theory movement. There was something I wrote there was something I had about Doris Ecker. I'm looking for it here. There was a woman in California named Doris Ecker who was an anti-Semite, and she was like a Gnostic New Age conspiracy theorist, and she gave channeled telepathic messages that she claimed were channeled to her telepathically by a spirit called Haton, who denounced Ashkenazis as false.
Wait a minute. The spirit's name was Haton, as in
Haton? No, Hatton. I might not be pronouncing it correctly, but that's not relevant. This spirit expressed belief in the protocols of the wise men of Zion to her, and he denounced the Ashkenazis as false Khazars, as not truly Jews. And he told her to denounce the Talmud as an evil document. I have some of the messages here somewhere on my computer. I'm looking for them. Let's see. Well, I'm trying to see if I can find the text of some of them. Here's one of them. I am Georgius Cyrus Haton, Commander-in-Chief, Earth Project Transition, Pleiades Sector Flight Commander, and he lists a bunch of other titles. He says, "You may call me Haton. Let there be no misunderstanding of who I am. I come in this portion
let's not do this right now.
I'm looking for the Khazar reference though. Okay, this one's short. There's two that are short.
It's just if you're talking to me about the Pleiades, I'm thinking Atlantis, Aryan Kangs, not valid. So basically anything coming afterwards, you've already set yourself up for me not to take it seriously.
I'm not saying I agree with conspiracy theorists. I'm saying they're a threat, that they're a dangerous movement. I'm not saying I agree with what he's saying. I'm saying that this is a threatening movement and that it bothers me that it's been mainstreamed by people like Adam Green, Christopher Bjerknes, and Alex Jones, and that Trump's presidency has mainstreamed it. And it especially bothers me that Trump has both mainstreamed the anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist, anti-Masonic conspiracy theory movement while he's also been working with Jewish Zionist fanatics, because that points towards those groups ultimately working towards the same goal, an end times death cult. But the thing I was going to read now,
Robert, just because you're going on and on with stuff that is saying it's not the content that we brought you on for, and it's saying you suffer. It doesn't mean it's saying you have a channel. People who want to know your ideas, you could come and advertise your channel and give like a larger analysis of what your ideas are. We don't need like your.
But could I just read one
you
sentence?
You don't need to repeat your content. You're saying
Right,
you have a channel in your content, so you can advertise your content. You don't need to.
Only one sentence. Could I just read one more sentence, please? Could I read one more sentence? Okay. If you ones cannot come into understanding that it is the Khazar Zionists who have you by the throat, then the rest of the explanation can have no impact or meaning of value. That's all I was going to read. So Hatton was promoting this conspiracy theory that some white nationalists also promote, that Ashkenazis are.
So I'm going to make the point that you fall into what Vince Bruno falls into, Adam Green, Jerkness, in that your thesis requires you to teach people what you're trying to teach against. So it's like Vince Bruno, who is trying to preach against Judaism in certain ways, but in order to do that, he spends the majority of his time as a rabbi wannabe because he has to teach about Judaism. Just like Adam Green and Christopher Van Jerkness, they're basically rabbis because in order to explain their conspiracy theories about the Jews, they have to explain Judaism. And so you, in order to explain why you think conspiracy theories are dangerous, you have to explain all these conspiracy theories. And so, like, yes, I understand your thesis. We don't need you to give any book reports on conspiracy theories for you to explain through repeating conspiracy theories why conspiracy theories might be dangerous. This show is about meta-analysis. It's like, I mean, that's why I was curious to invite.
Christopher Bierkness on Adam Green talking about his new book, Beware the World to Come.
Yeah, I read that book. I mean.
Well, that book, it's very kooky and crackpotty, and he said obviously false things in it. The fact that he's getting a mainstream audience promoting that ridiculous book is scary to me. And
just your statement there from me and Jennifer's level it's scary to you. Because the cognitive dissonance, because you have a misperception of the world, and when you see an accurate perception of the world, it causes you dissonance, but your dissonance is because you had a miscorrect, and you're saying like, okay, and I'm not saying that Adam Green and Jerkness have the correct representation, but it does not cause me dissonance that there's people espousing conspiracy theories or even anti-Semitic theories out there. In fact, I expect it. So why does it cause you dissonance?
Because here's an example. During Trump's presidency, his supporters have been fanatically promoting these ridiculous conspiracy theories about Jeffrey Epstein's and Ghislaine Maxwell's Jewish prostitution.
I'm trying to get to a more deep. You're saying because you fear death. You're saying because you're a Jew and you're scared that if these guys keep on doing it, it might cost you your life.
No,
that type of reason. Or you're saying
are innocent. That's not what I'm saying. I think a lot of like I said at the beginning, I think a lot of the things Jews are accused of, they are guilty of. I'm not defending Jews. I'm saying the conspiracy theory movement is dangerous. That's my point. I'm not saying
aren't all movements dangerous? I mean, no, I don't see what you're saying, because it's like you're saying like the way like the conspiracy theory movement's dangerous, but like aren't all movements dangerous? And like but like our political parties, like to Doooovid, I agree with you. Although the theory of evolution is a far, far more dangerous conspiracy theory than any anti-Semitic theory. As a Jew who might, God forbid, suffer the direct brunt of anti-Semitism, I am much more concerned about this nasty conspiracy theory that people call the theory of evolution.
But every time, I don't see how the theory of evolution is a conspiracy theory. Please explain that to me. That makes no. I'm not saying evolution is right, but how is it a conspiracy theory?
Because it was conjured up by a handful of people and perpetrated on the masses, and it's pretty blatantly not true. But it's shoved down the throat of all of humanity. If you say Judaism, like Judaism's only shoved down the throat of even a small percentage of Jews, as where evolution is shoved down the throat of anybody who wants to get ahead in the academic world.
conspiracy to get people to believe in it, but is it a conspiracy? If it were a conspiracy theory, that would mean evolution was accusing someone of conspiring. Who is evolution accusing of conspiring?
Mutations are conspiring with biological matter to
A mutation
cause
isn't,
evolution. But a mutation I'm not saying I agree with rewriting everything as a conspiracy theory, but technically you can do it even with impersonal entities. You just have to understand what exactly conspiracy theory means.
I can give a concrete example of how conspiracy theory
Not from a spiritual level, saying evolution was blatantly false. Right, it was made up and perpetrated by a handful of people in order to screw the world and convince people to sin and act like idiots. And I could name them because they're the professors and leaders of every major university. And it's a conspiracy. Those are nasty, sinful people that have in mind the destruction of humanity. And you say, okay, that's similar to an anti-Jewish conspiracy theory. But you know, to take it to a level, it's not personal. It's just a pattern. So people, I'm not saying that the people who preach evolution are demonic. There are people who've fallen into a nefarious pattern.
To give a concrete example of what I was saying, there are anti-Jewish tropes. Like, in my opinion, the vampire genre has anti-Jewish tropes, and that ties in.
So what? Like, there's been anti-Jewish tropes for thousands of years. Like, of course, there's a lot of people. Like, my rabbi told me, he's like, I am a Jew. There are hundreds of millions of people who want me dead. I am not surprised that there are hundreds of millions of people who want me dead. Like, God forbid, like, I'm a Jew. I have embraced it. Like, no, it's not surprising.
This is dishonest of you, because every time I try to give an example of how the conspiracy theory movement is becoming mainstream and how it's sinister, or any evidence for my position, you just interrupt me and bring up something irrelevant to my point.
I have a question. Remember when they were saying, oh, there
because I broke your point, because
was that a conspiracy theory? Because it seems like it was.
Could I be allowed to say something, like be given 5 minutes to make a statement without interruption, and then I'll stop within 5 minutes? It's 8:33. You can time me, and if I go over that, you can stop me. Could we make that as a deal?
Well, that's not really the point of the show. The point of the show is have a discussion, like a 2 to 3 way discussion, you know, not just a monologue where everything
not 5 minutes. How about 1 minute? Does 1 minute work?
And we're like, week in review. We're supposed to like.
What about
I'm saying you didn't even listen to like what this show's about. I mean, it's not a problem. We invited you on, but you're saying the show is about coordinating things in the future and being efficient and trading trips of streamers. So it's like people aren't here to listen to you. You and all your theories. People are here for a week in review and to coordinate and learn about your channel.
What about
things.
30 seconds? Could I say something for 30 seconds even?
Okay.
All right. Well, Julius Streicher was a Nazi party official who was obsessed with his belief that there was a sexual perversion among a small but significant minority of Jews. And he attended the first premiere of the film Nosferatu, which is a film version of Dracula. And he liked it, and he viewed it as supporting anti-Jewish beliefs about a small but significant minority of Jews being sexual predators. And the actor who was in Dracula, I don't remember his first name, but his last name was Schreck or Schrank or something like that, and he had pointed ears in the film because of the mask he wore, but in real life he did not have pointed ears. So he looked, and he was not a Jew, but they made him look Jewish in the film. And I read the novel Dracula by Bram Stoker recently, and Dracula was described as having pointed ears, and a small but significant minority of Jews have pointed ears. And the three vampiresses who tried to seduce the Anglo-Saxon land agent Jonathan Harker, who Dracula stopped them, the way they were described, they looked kind of like Jewesses to me. They were described as having voluptuous lips and bright white sharp teeth that shined more conspicuously against their red voluptuous lips. And I looked at 2 pictures of Jewish women. They were journalists. Maybe not the other, but Hadass Gold, she has very bright red sensual lips, and she has very white teeth. And
these are like 30 seconds. It's been like 2 minutes and you're telling a story. I thought you were going to make a point. You're telling some story. Who the hell care? You don't have a point. You keep on telling stories.
I'm saying the vampire genre has anti-Jewish tropes in it. In this time,
Okay, so what? Yeah, I knew that. Like, so what?
It's linked to the conspiracy theory movement. In my
what?
So that's sinister because of the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell conspiracy theories. People are going to be inspired to hate their Jewish elites.
So because of some vampire movies, people are going to hate Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. Is that correct?
Not them specifically. They'll hate the Jewish Masonic political elites, and But Christopher Bierknes and Alex Jones and Adam Green are popularizing this narrative. It's not just and Julius Streicher popularized it. He was a Nazi Party official. He tried to incorporate the vampire themes, and he explicitly said he was influenced by the film Nosferatu in doing so. And until Hitler banned his publications, he had publications about Jews sexually seducing children and drinking their blood and stuff like that. So, and that was in Nazi Germany. It was part of even though Hitler did not approve of this publication, it helped.
So you see that there'll be some sort of culmination of forces that therefore what you're supporting censorship, or you're just warning the people karma is bad. And action reaction is adding up, and if you don't do something about it,
conspiracy theory movement sinister. That's what I'm saying. And there's
so what? Why does your judgment matter? It's who cares whether you find something sinister?
Sinister is that the same person who's supported by the conspiracy theory movement, which hates Jews, is also supported by Jewish Zionist fanatics like you who worship him. You practically worship Donald Trump. I've seen you talk about him before. You seem to think he's your Mashiach. And it's Sanhedrin in Israel put both Trump and Netanyahu on a coin with the words "War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness" in English and Hebrew on one side, and the previous Jewish Messiah, King Cyrus of Persia, on the other with Isaiah. It was something Isaiah and Anointed King written on the other side in English and Hebrew. Why should I not find that sinister?
Because one thing, because it's good, and it's going to be good for even you. But so what? Maybe you do find it sinister. Yeah, we won. We got Trump and our guy in office, and he hooked us up, and you're just crying from the sidelines. So what?
But it's weird.
You're saying, no, you're not going to get away with it, Doovid. The forces are going to add up. And
the same person is supported by Jewish Zionist fanatics and anti-Jewish crackpots who want to exterminate Jewry. It's very weird that the same people pass.
Why is it weird? It's people, we did what we had to do to beat you, and thank God we did. And it was risky. It was extremely risky, and it could have repercussions. And people should know about it, but beyond that, so what?
What's weird about it is the same man is supported both by Jewish Zionist fanatics and anti-Jewish fanatics who want to exterminate Jews.
You haven't studied history. I'm saying that's not weird. One thing is not weird at all. It's actually expected.
Maybe it's weird, but
you show your own ignorance of history to you that's weird as opposed to expected.
Maybe weird is the wrong word. It's sinister because it's weird. Not weird. It's sinister.
It's expected. Are you saying that someone who is familiar with the larger sociological and historical processes would have expected that, or would have said that that's an anomaly in the canon?
Weird, but it is sinister. That's why weird may have been.
But if the expectation is sinister, so what? Human nature. And we expected the outcome to be sinister. So why are you complaining now that it's sinister? Wasn't that the expectation?
Here's one thing I want to say something about you personally. You one time I saw a post you made on Twitter where you had a picture of yourself next to, what's his name? Abraham
Foxman.
No, Abraham Foxman of the Anti-Defamation League. You were standing next to him, and this was right after you'd been on Adam Green's show. I find it very suspicious that you're both hanging out with Abraham Foxman and Adam Green and Christopher Bierknes. Maybe the people...
I've never hung out with Adam Green or Christopher Bierknes. We live long ways away. I've never met those people in my life. It's not surprising that I hung out with Abe Foxman because he's a prominent character. He came to Detroit and for an open crowd, and I waited in line and I spoke to him. And no, I've never hung out with Christopher Bierknes or Adam Green in my life. I debated against them. I'm not like their buddies. I'm a free speech advocate. I don't think they're evil people. I think I disagree with their ideas. I debated against them. But no, I don't think they're evil, demonic
say-
people that like need to be stopped or censored personally, even though I know, in fact, I have on my YouTube channel, I asked Jonathan Greenblatt about speaking to these people, and he said that's not his approach. His approach is censor them, ban them, report them.
Suspicious of it.
But he accepted that there is an approach of talking to these guys, and that's Doovid's approach.
Less suspicious of Jonathan Greenblatt than I am of you, because I think it's very weird that you are tolerating these people speaking out against your people. I think there's a sinister motive behind it, and it makes more sense to me Jonathan Greenblatt would at least try to shut them up. So I'm less suspicious of him than I am of you.
What you say is, I mean, the sinister motive, it just theologically, I mean, I think Jennifer, the audience, understands. It's just saying that to me, ideas are not dangerous, and it's better for people to speak these things out. And that even what I do, that's like public therapy. So your accusation is based upon a worldview that, in my opinion, is scientifically inaccurate and just demonstrates your lack of knowledge about consciousness or even cognitive processes, and that's fine. You can have your opinion and all these axioms, like you didn't want to talk about the axioms, and you don't even realize that to make the accusations you're making all sorts of false assumptions about cognitive processes. And that was more interested in talking about, and you say, okay, my Doovid sinister, and saying like Doovid sinister because I hate the world, God forbid, and want everybody to suffer because I'm upset about something that happened to me, and you're going to use that to explain my motive, or you say because the demon possessed me and it's causing me, or did I simply put a pattern together incorrectly, and now Robert could come on the show and remove the plank from my eye and demonstrate to me how it was like a chess combination and I missed a move, and you're going to show it to me, and forever now whenever I come to this position I'll know the right combination.
What about the thing I mentioned about the Zohar having a prediction that there would be a mass extermination of a minority of Jews who were considered evil to purify Jewry, and the Holocaust?
God forbid, but it's like, so what? Every Jewish text, God forbid, if you're a Jew or read it, warns about the destruction of the Jewish people should we not listen to our God. From Moses to the Talmud, to our prayers. And so you're saying that, there's a Jewish text that warns about the destruction of the Jewish people. Should we not fulfill the commandment? Yes, that's our religion. That's what our texts say. Like big book. So what? What's your point?
Is some Jews have been sponsoring anti-Semitism. For example, Jacob Frank did. He promoted the blood libel.
Sponsoring?
What?
He's saying that causing anti-Semitism by sinning and wronging other people.
No, I'm not.
Sponsoring, you're going to say like hurtful and saying that using anti-Semitism for his own benefit. No,
I said Jacob Frank accused Jews of the blood libel. He claimed, and there may be truth to the blood libel. I don't have an opinion on whether it's true, but Jacob Frank claimed that.
Why don't you have an opinion? Like, isn't there overwhelming evidence that it's not true? But you don't have an opinion on that?
Relevant to my point whether the blood libel is true, and it's off topic to my point, and you're being dishonest by trying to change the subject.
No, I mean, you said that it's not the point, but saying like academically, that God forbid, like of all the Jewish people in all of history, there's at most evidence for less than half a dozen blood libels in the history of millions and millions of Jewish people in European history. You're saying
blood libel was true. I said I don't have an opinion on whether it's true.
Why don't you have an opinion? You're saying like you don't have the opinion of whether the sky is blue. You don't have the opinion whether.
I personally am inclined to think it's false. I've never endorsed it, and my current inclination is to think it's false, but it's not relevant.
You're personally inclined to think that the world is round, but you haven't personally endorsed it.
We're trying to. I think you're doing this because either way I lose. Because if
you're turning me into Deborah Lipstadt on you. Like, you got me
definitively false.
You got me channeling Deborah Lipstadt on you. What are you doing here, man?
Well, you invited me on. Why aren't you letting me say anything? You're just interrupting.
Because you're forcing me to channel Deborah Lipstadt on you.
true isn't relevant to my point, which is Jacob Frank promoted belief in it in order to vilify Jews. So that's an example of a Jew sponsoring anti-Semitism. That was the point I was going to make, and I think you knew I was
So
going
what's
to.
the point that a Jew sponsored anti-Semitism? So what? What's the point?
I think maybe you're one of these Jews because you go on Adam Green's show. You're enabling anti-Semitism. Why don't you try to shut up anti-Semites like Jonathan Greenblatt does? It seems to me like you're encouraging this as part of an end times dialectic, and you think Donald Trump or some other Jew is your Messiah. In doing this, enables him to become the Messiah. It seems to me like that's what's going on with you.
Shots
Well, let's
fired.
take first here, and to say possibly maybe your rebuke's correct, and you say I am doing this as some sort of end time prophecy or end time understanding, and is that a good or bad thing? And should I say yes? Actually, you're right. I do believe in these end time prophecies, and that is why I'm doing this.
Do you
And
want
it's saying like, no, that's not why I think I'm doing this. But even if that were true, I'm not necessarily denying that that would be a bad thing. And I say, yes, I'm doing it because I do believe in these end time prophecies, and I'm trying to expedite the conclusion of these end time prophecies. But even from that, like, no, the reason I did it is because I wanted to defend the Jews, and I wanted to defend the Rebbe, and I wanted to demonstrate that what the Chabad Rebbe doing for the world is a positive thing, and it benefits even Adam Green, and that Adam Green, because he plays videos of the Rebbe, that in essence he's still doing a service, even though he might be giving an anti-Semitic message, because the Rebbe is so powerful, and just that he plays clips of the Rebbe, that alone was enough that I spoke with him.
I have a question. Do you view Donald Trump as potentially the Moshiach, the Messiah?
No, 0% chance. I did view Donald Trump as possibly a tool of not the Jews, but God, in order to help rebuild the temple.
What
And
about
not that the Jews conspired to team up with Donald Trump to make him president, but that God himself rose Donald Trump up in order to help the Jews rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. I do reserve that as a very possible possibility in my head. Yes.
what about Jared Kushner? Is he possibly the Messiah? Because Adam Green did a
No, I
video.
mean 0% chance. And I told him that I was on his show. I'm saying, Jared, you have to be a son after son descendant of King David. Jared Kushner is a Jew. He may have done substantial things. Maybe it's possible that if the temple gets rebuilt, in the near future, that it will turn out that Jared Kushner did more towards that than any other person on the planet. But no, Jared Kushner cannot be Messiah. The Maimonides and the sages are very clear about the requirements for Messiah, and Jared Kushner does not meet them. The Lubavitch Rebbe could have been Messiah. The Lubavitch Rebbe met the qualifications for Messiah. And Jared Kushner, 0% chance. But I'm not saying that Jared Kushner and Donald Trump are not playing an integral part in what's happening, even though there's 0% chance that either Trump or Kushner could be Messiah.
Could Trump or Kushner be friends with the Messiah or somehow connected to him personally? Could the Jewish Messiah be around now and be somehow linked to Trump?
Yeah, I would like to believe that, but no, I don't even think the Jewish Messiah needs to have ever met Trump. I mean, like the Lubavitch Rebbe never accepted the invitations to the White House. The Lubavitch Rebbe was honored by every president from Carter through when he died, I think under Clinton, and never went to the White House to accept the invitation. But that there might be a Jewish Messiah around now that will preside over the building of the temple, and Jared Kushner and Donald Trump could play an integral part in that process. Like, yeah, as a Jew, we're probably supposed to believe that, and I will push back and to say, like, no, I don't think I'm encouraging anti-Semitism. I think that as a Jew, we're required to believe in Messiah and Messiah's coming, and that God controls the hearts and minds of people, including the leadership, and it's not a conspiracy from the perspective that you call it conspiracy, and I accept the term conspiracy, and we've talked about it on the show, but saying the conspirator is in fact God, and the reason why you see what's happening happen is because the person orchestrating this conspiracy is not a person, but is in fact God. and the God that is orchestrating this conspiracy is in fact the God of the whole world and the only God, and that God of the world and the only God is in fact the God who chose the Jewish people and gave us the Torah and the commandments and will eventually redeem the world and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. You say, yeah, that's Judaism 101. Are you disagreeing? Do you have a problem with that? You think Judaism's a false religion? Are you trying to tell Doovid to stop believing in my religion?
I already explained earlier in answer to the last question that my issue is not against the Bible or Talmud. I don't think the Jewish Zionist end times fanatics are guided by the Bible.
Saying, like, if I believe in a God that controls the whole world and is going to help us rebuild their temple, why the hell would I be scared to talk to Patrick Little or Adam Green or Christopher Ben-Jerktis and not think that God is just using them as a simple pawn and tool towards the purpose of what the Bible says God is going to do?
I wanted to ask you, do you think the Jewish Messiah is on earth right now?
Well, I hope so, but no, I don't have any inside knowledge. But yeah, I would hope so. Yeah, please. I mean, amen. Music to my ears.
Do you think he's the same person that Christians believe the Antichrist to be? Yes or no?
No, I'm not. I mean, to say I do interfaith with Christians all the time, and the concept of an Antichrist in the Messiah and what's going to happen and what the expectations of Messiah are could be opposites. That you're saying, like, I'm expecting someone to rebuild the temple and reinstitute the priestly class, and you're saying the Christians are saying that the person who's going to do that is the Antichrist. It's possible, but I believe in God, and I'm willing to saying that's why what you're calling a death cult is just saying I believe in God. And even though these people that are saying the opposite of me and have opposite beliefs of me, currently there's a logic to working together with them. So I'm going to do it because I believe that God's going to work it out and I'm going to win in the end. And you're looking at it from a straight logical perspective of it's like a game of chicken, and both of these guys are saying the opposite thing. So it's possible that both sides are going to win in the end. One of them is going to lose, and saying that's why Doovid's got the multiple truth hypothesis.
I have a quick question. Do you know who Maitreya is, and could the Jewish Messiah be the same person as Maitreya?
I'm not sure I heard Maitreya. I mean, is that some
I've heard it pronounce the Maitreya or something. I heard
pronouncing
that with a different pronunciation. Yeah, yes, it's some sort of cultic movement. The Maitreya is going to be some sort of something.
Yes, the Maitreya. I'll try to explain it quickly. The Maitreya is somebody who was predicted by Alice Bailey, Benjamin Cream, and others to be a global messiah. And on April 25th, 1982, Benjamin Cream ran an ad in major newspapers that millions of people read that said Maitreya would soon come to Earth and be the global messiah. And QAnon, in their propaganda book, QAnon and the 1,000 Years of Peace, talks about a global messiah they'll reveal to the world in the future. And one of the names they give him is Maitreya. So could this Maitreya person...
Are you sure the word isn't Maitreya?
I don't know how to pronounce it. I'll spell it. Maitreya. That's how you spell it.
I've heard people tell tale of this, and they pronounced it Maitreya. Maybe it's connected to masters somehow.
Let's just call him Lord M, so that we don't have confusion.
No, it's cool. I just I wish I had more to give you, but
I mean, there's a value to getting things right.
But I'm getting the impression that you're trying to focus on irrelevant issues to dodge.
No, because to me, I mean, believing in the coming of Messiah, I mean, it was doing with Luke 4, is an essential required belief upon Jews.
You're dodging my
people believing in a false Messiah. It's better to believe in a false Messiah than to reject the concept of Messiah from a Jewish opinion. The belief in a Messiah is a fundamental opinion. So you're telling me about people that believe in false messiahs, and from a Judeo position, the rejection of the belief in Messiah is a more serious problem.
He did on his show with Alan Colmes. You keep interrupting me and straw manning me. I asked a simple question. Could the Jewish Messiah be the same person as Lord Maitreya? It's a simple question.
No. The Jewish Messiah has to be a direct son after son descendant to King David, who redeems the Jewish people, overthrows our oppressors, rebuilds the temple, brings peace and love and knowledge of God to all of humanity. And so saying, no, Maitreya, you're saying, is secretly a son after son descendant to King David, or secretly brought the dominion of the God, Shem, Jehovah to the world? No, it didn't happen. I mean, you could give a Masonic multiple truth hypothesis explanation of similarities, but saying, yes, there's similarities in concept of a Messianic redemptive figure, but the expectations of the qualifications for who could be that figure, and whether it's through bloodline or deeds, and the expectations of what that figure is going to do.
Fine. Okay.
So if it's Jesus Christ, you're saying the Jews reject Jesus Christ as Messiah, not necessarily because he doesn't meet the qualifications. He's a son from King David. He's a Jew. But because the expectations that the Jews have that Messiah will do, that Jesus Christ does not meet that. So saying Maitreya on the level is not even like Jesus Christ, not even a Jew, not even a direct descendant of King David. So on both ends, Maitreya would not meet the expectations of a Jewish Messiah. But of course, there's similarities in interfaith and interreligious dialogue that all religions have concepts of a redemptive figure.
You're going on. I want to ask something else. Are you aware that there are claims Patrick Little is an FBI agent? This ties in with something I'm about to say.
How?
Yeah, I mean, Luke Ford discussed that, and I doubt it. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he's somehow affiliated with government intelligence, or there's agencies using him or following that he himself is an agent. I would doubt it, but I don't have any special knowledge or reason why I would know that. But no, I highly doubt that.
Well, it ties in with the point I was about to make. It's kind of an analogy. He carried those bizarre signs in public saying Jews rape kids, and that's why people thought he was an FBI agent. And I think he is an FBI agent. And I'm analogizing his behavior to a Jewish journalist who claims she opposes Trump. There's a Jewish journalist named Julia Yaffa who claims to obsessively oppose Trump, and she was fired from her job at Politico because she made an inflammatory tweet about Trump where she said Trump is fucking his daughter. Well, that's very.
Yeah, I've heard of her. I mean, we didn't cover that, but I mean, somewhat it's possible. They say, yeah, that's the way the deep state masonry works. That it could be Patrick Little's a deep state figure, but at some point, I haven't seen enough evidence besides the possibility.
Jewish Zionist fanatics who worships Trump as the Moshiach, and she's pretending to be his enemy to get right-wing anti-Semites to vote for Trump, because by being an obnoxious liberal Jewess campaigning against Trump, it inspires love of Trump and obsessive
because it's a regular contrarian strategy that there's many people in the public realm that you could point out that employ this contrarian strategy successfully. So what? What's your point?
Well, I find it sinister that this is happening. Well, also
sinister. What means sinister? Therefore, like if from some dualistic, moralistic realm, what's the origin of bad? Like, what do you mean sinister? And who are you? Who cares whether you find it sinister or not?
Well, there's also
why should anybody care whether you find it sinister or not?
Here's another example.
There's some guy out there that won't even tell me his name, and he's saying this action is bad. Like, so what? Who cares?
I'll tell you my name.
You said you didn't even believe in karma. You just said that you didn't believe that it matters whether someone that action reaction in a moral realm, but yet the person who doesn't believe in karma is wasting his time saying things are sinister. So I mean, you've already completely contradicted the logic of your whole essence. If there is no karma, it doesn't matter whether it's sinister.
Maybe there is karma. I didn't say there wasn't karma. I said I didn't know enough about it to have an opinion on it. That's not the same thing as saying that it's there's no karma. I said I didn't have an opinion on it.
Is there objectively a better status for a person to be live than dead? Can you say objectively that it was better for any given person in any given situation to be alive than dead?
That just seems like you're acting like an autistic child who asks irrelevant questions.
No, it's a deep theological question that's going to necessitate an answer, and the answer to the question is going to necessitate an axiom. And the point that you can't answer the question is that then you're going to come to it that what reason is it that there's better for a person to be alive than dead And based on that axiomatic structure, probably you're going to need to derive some sort of spiritual force for that, or you're going to be suffered into nihilism. And you say, no, factually, it doesn't matter. It's not a better state to be alive than dead. So it's a question of sinister. Like, why is it sinister? It's sinister because it's going to cause more people to be in the state of dead than alive, when you couldn't even establish from some objective standpoint that it's better to be in the state of life than death in the first place.
Well, there's a connection between Trump and Hitler, even though Trump is obviously not an ethnic nationalist. There's a connection in that they both had the similarity of serving the opposite ends, or being linked to the opposite ends of this end times death cult. They were both supported both by anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish, anti-Masonic conspiracy theorists.
So what? Yeah, I mean, you keep on continuing. So you haven't even established that there's a principle of ahimsa. Like, do you believe in the principle of ahimsa, and therefore that's why you're telling us, because your goal is to limit suffering?
I want less suffering, yes, and I think the conspiracy.
So that's your axiom. So you could say the reason why you're telling us all this information is because that's going to help establish the goal that that is common between me, you, and Jennifer, and that's the limiting of suffering.
I want to reference, there was an article in the Jewish Telegraphic Agency on November 11th, 1934.
I'm going through these points to make a difference. That if you're saying why there's a conversation between me, you, and Jennifer is because we agree on the axiom of ahimsa.
Yes, but there was an article in the Jewish.
Is that just something that we've arbitrarily accepted?
I just said I agree with you. So why are we still talking about that? You're asking me a question
because you keep on telling me this pointless information about connecting this and that.
Autistic shithead asking irrelevant questions.
The guy who keeps on trying to bring parallels between Hitler and Trump is not autistic. At least I'm a scientist. Like, there's value to what I'm talking about. You haven't even been able to establish that there's any value to listening to the information that you're giving.
Trump works for Jews, so in terms of substance, they're not similar. What is similar is the mimetic significance they have, the significance they have as means. And I already said that. And I was going to say there was an article in the Jewish Telegraphic Agency on November 11th, 1934, that said Rabbi Israel Leventhal in New York, who had spent 6 months in Israel, said that Hitler was the Jewish Messiah because he was forcing Jews to go to Israel. And he said it at an address with the location 667, which is very close to 666, which some people think will be a number associated with the Antichrist. Now, I don't think numbers have magic significance, but people could still arrange for numbers to be seen in certain contexts to give mimetic significance. Trump had both Donald Trump and Jared Kushner have addresses with 666 in them. And there was one other thing I was going to say about that. I forget what it. But I find that troubling. Like, it seems like there's this movement to bring an Antichrist figure to the head of a one world religion and one world government, and Trump is a dupe of that movement. That's what it seems like to me.
Well, I mean, I agree a lot of the patterns you're recognizing, and I think the disconnect we're having is you have some sort of arbitrary value system that you haven't specified that you're using to judge this as good or bad. So we could just discuss what's happening and the forces that are causing it to happen with zero judgment of good and bad, even though, God forbid, it might involve things that could be considered good and bad, like suffering and death. Okay, but so you can't just discuss what you're talking about with its implications, and you're trying to draw in the implications of what it's saying are good or bad, but you haven't developed an objective moral system that we could understand what you mean as good or bad. So it comes to a point where there's almost zero value to what you said, because like it's just going to come out like a whole word salad because you didn't.
Objective morality is irrelevant to my point, just like when police arrested me.
So stop using the point of good or bad. No one cares whether you think it's good or bad. If you think this is going to happen, and this is the reason why you think it's going to happen, whether you think it's good or bad, I don't care.
I'm saying if somebody murdered somebody, the police aren't going to listen to him if he says there's no objective morality, therefore you shouldn't arrest me. And it seems like
I mean that you mean when you gave these examples, I mean you were basically missing a higher logic all the time. It's saying there's a law. It's saying what the intention may or may not matter. And if the person committed the crime and intention is not part of the punishment, and also if a person is whatever the case may be in front of the judgment, there's different ways of looking at it. And so the officer is saying there's a law, there's a rule that's been broken, it's karma, there's an action, and there has to be a reaction. Whether the rule is good or bad makes absolutely no difference. You could have action and reaction in rules without good and bad. So your insistence on throwing in these terms good and bad makes it hard to have a conversation.
I want to make a brief point. I find it suspicious that
unless you're willing to define some objective standard of good and bad.
All right,
or at least your own standard, what you're using for good and bad.
I already told you why I don't think that that's relevant. It would be like if police were arresting a murderer.
So then just make your points without your opinions about whether it's good or bad.
You're the one who kept bringing good and bad into it. I just reported it factually and said I think it's a problem. You're the one who keeps bringing
You're just like Dutton. You're just saying like, here's a pattern, and I'm like, okay, here's a pattern.
You're just
okay, very good. Like you noticed the pattern. Good for you.
Conversation by making it about the ontology of morality instead of about my point. But I want to get.
I still haven't. I'm waiting to demonstrate whether you actually have a point. You're just like pointing out to me some nice patterns that I largely already knew. Like you didn't actually do any useful thing for me or my audience. You just pointed out a bunch of patterns that we all already knew.
I want to make a brief point. Adam Green had a wide audience on YouTube before he was banned. He had 21,000 subscribers, more than that actually. And a lot of people thought it was suspicious YouTube tolerated him. And a lot of people thought he might be a government agent. And I think it's possible he's one. And there's also another guy on YouTube, Brother James Key. He has 19,000 subscribers. And he keeps saying Trump is the Antichrist, but he's only ever had even one video banned or even restricted. I think it's very suspicious he's allowed to be on there and promote this idea Trump's the Antichrist. And I think it might be part of a psyop to try to inspire violence against officials in Trump's administration, similarly to how Herschel Greenspan, a 17-year-old Jewish boy, on November 7th, 1938, murdered a German embassy official in Paris.
I heard you saying that story. I have a whole stream on my channel with Veronica Kuzniar about Greenspan. You even mentioned his possible homosexuality and the disputes. I mean, Veronica Kuzniar and God forbid David. My name's even slipping me, but yeah, I mean, we've been rambling for a while here, and
okay,
it is week in review and saying like people got a good feel of you and some of your ideas. And I guess like you're a private person, like you're not. Are you promoting a channel? Is there a place people could find you?
There's my YouTube channel, and you can link it since you've seen my channel. If you want, you can link it on your YouTube or whatever.
I mean, you want to discuss briefly like a strategy, like what do you want to accomplish in streaming? Are you trying to get on and talk to people or promote certain ideas? Are you a one-track guy? Like this, basically all you want to talk about?
I have other interests. I made videos on other topics on YouTube. I talked about.
What's the name of your channel, dear?
I think I changed it to Robert Lawrence. It used to be something else, but my mom was worried about my getting doxxed, so I changed the name. So, and I have some videos up on YouTube, and if you want to link it on your channel, you can link it on your channel. I don't know how to send you the link right now. Maybe I can send it to you on Twitter, I guess. But I guess I'll go now because I don't think this conversation will go anywhere from here.
Okay, yeah, take care. Thanks for coming on.
Bye.
If you want to pop back in and show your streaming progress or what you're up to, I mean, I appreciate going on, but yeah, I mean, it didn't seem like we were getting to the point where we were going to be able to discuss axioms or get any further in these arguments. It's just going to be him giving like book reports on these various things, and he would go in, kind of like I mean, I don't, maybe he's another Vince like that, where it's just like, you give him a chance to prove your point, and then he's just going to go like on a 20-minute book report. He doesn't understand what I'm asking from him. I mean, what was your take on that?
I think he'd already seen you streaming before and maybe was reacting to a prior impression of you, because at some point it sort of got taken back to like, I wanted to address this thing that you said this one time. Can't even remember what it was, but yeah, there was
I was trying to have a serious conversation with him, and I wanted to establish axioms, and I felt that I couldn't establish this guy's axioms, and every time I turned it back to him, he would just like go on and say like, like these long reports about what these other people say, and he's like, it's trying to like, why do I care for him to give me this long report about what these other people say? And he's like, because conspiracy theories are dangerous, and so like, well, I disagree with that tenet, and so I wanted to argue with him the tenet that, I mean, that's why I invited him on, that I was going to claim that conspiracy theories are a natural form of cognition and consciousness and pattern recognition, and that was what I brought him on to talk about. But instead, like, he spent basically the whole time just repeating, word for word, these other people's conspiracy theories, which, relatively, anyone who watches this channel probably didn't need him to do, because like we're familiar with that stuff.
yeah, I think he thought he was gonna like red pill us, but it's just not gonna happen. I do think it's good to have some idea of what the show is about before coming on, because like,
well, I reached out to him because I saw him, and but I didn't realize that I didn't. I mean, he was smart, and like I'm not upset I reached out to him or we spoke to him for so long. I hope you aren't, but I'm saying no. I mean, I was the one who reached out to him because he was on Luke, and I thought he still might have something interesting to say. It just like after an hour, it seemed like all he was going to be able to do was just keep on reporting what these other people are saying.
yeah, it was challenging, because we don't really go into it on that level very often, do we?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't establish that before he came on. He wasn't like a regular viewer that had been seeing our show and then came on. So there wasn't expectations, and I thought the guy was high IQ as a reviler. I'm not saying like a different approach, and I thought that this guy was informative to what I want to talk about on consciousness and Bayesian analysis, in the value of the multiple truth hypothesis, to saying that there is a framework to understand this type of thing, and just the fact that people think of conspiracy theories and follow conspiracy theories like, of course, like that's just pattern recognition. That's how the mind works. And to anybody who's surprised by that, to me, like, I'm surprised that you don't understand how the mind works, and that the mind could work in nefarious ways. It's like, of course the mind could work in nefarious ways. Like, what world do you live in where the mind can't work in nefarious ways?
Yeah, it kind of comes off as like unhinged degrees of paranoia and not a very sober analysis. We can go back to the sober analysis right now, though, because I really do want either you or someone to argue in favor of this Bayesian theorem thing, because I just can't get my head around it. And I was supposed to know what it was at my old job, and I feel like I maybe did a bad job there, sort of, because I didn't understand this theorem at all. It's just I struggle to see where it would apply, because it seems to multiply the unknowns and open the door for the effects of incorrect axioms to multiply.
Well, I mean, its goal is to limit margin of error. I mean, that's it specifically, and it's a statistical means of where you have multiple cases, each with their own margin of error, and to distribute the margin of error. So I mean, that's the essence of really all statistical methods, and the multiple truth hypothesis, even in general, as something that will include statistical methods, but Bayesian analysis works. I mean, you could probably use Wikipedia or something, a simple example, and it said like when you're in school, you do efficacy examples with Bayesian analysis where you have like the cases of false negatives of 95% of people tested positive, 5% tested. I mean, 95% people tested negative, 5% tested positive. But of the 5% that tested positive, 90% only 5% of those people are actually positive or something like that. And then to put that through the equation, where it would give you a general probability distribution or a net probability that's more useful to work with. And so anybody, like even an entry level of statistics, like really use Bayesian analysis, and Bayesian analysis could be expanded even for the hard problem of consciousness. That a lot of mechanistic models of chunking, where chunking and chunking processes eventually produce some method of consciousness. It's usually some form of Bayesian analysis that they would use to show how metadata is produced, so to say, that a whole series of lower level processing could produce a higher level of metadata, that Bayesian analysis is useful for that. I didn't prepare like a PowerPoint. I've done it on my channel even. I mean, Jennifer's going straight to the court case where they ruled that it couldn't be admissible for, I mean, it's just a statistical method. But to the mathematics or the use of Bayesian analysis, from my understanding, is one of the most commonly used mathematical tools, period.
I just never used it, and I have a degree in math, so it seems strange that I've never had.
Well, it's a relatively simple statistical analysis tool.
Well, I mean, yeah, I get it. It's easy. It's just algebra, but doesn't the formulation imply that A and B are independent?
I mean, if you want to do the homework and do a presentation on it, I mean, you have the paper, the problems with it, the assumptions of it. If you want to, get like Gödelian on it and try to critique its assumption, versus it's kind of a Wolfram computational type thing. It's not necessarily designed to be mathematically true. It's designed to give the most useful answer in a case of uncertainty. It's not it's not a mathematical theorem that's supposed to withstand the rigors of the deepest critique. It's a statistical method that's designed to give the closest estimated answer in cases of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. It's just like PA given B, PB given A. If those two things can be separately defined, doesn't imply that A and B are independent, or am I just misunderstanding?
Well, I mean, if you want to learn the equation, why don't you bring up like the wiki or page that just explains the equation? It's really not complicated.
Oh, I know what the equation is.
I think even something in middle school could
understand.
Question. Well, it's because you're trying to do like a trick question, like just put up.
It's not a trick question. It's
just put up like a Wikipedia that has it. This is really like a middle school equation.
Oh, I know. But that doesn't mean I'm going to pretend that it makes sense just to make people feel better. I still don't really understand the crux of like what information this theory is supposed to be conveying. And that's not an attack on you. It's just a personal anecdote.
Yeah, I mean,
here you go.
I mean, it's kind of like you and Robert on that. No one cares your opinion. Like anybody who's been to university or done anything in statistics knows Bayes' theorem and knows its widespread use, and your failure to understand it is not affecting the prominence of it's just like evolution. Like Doooovid's negative opinion on evolution, is not even damaged a tiny bit the prevalence of evolution in every major institution.
Okay, so the answer is that A and B have to be different events. And then the question is, how different do they have to be? Like, is it okay if one causes the other? That's all I'm saying, is that if that's not part of the axiom, the answer is not going to be right if one has a causal link to the other between A and B. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm just saying no one asked you for your opinion on Bayesian analysis. Bayesian analysis.
And I'm just curious. I'm just curious.
Mathematical tool. The fact that you have a negative opinion of it is not like like hold the press is the millions and millions of people that are currently using this tool now that Jennifer's given a critique of it are not going to stop using it. They're not even going to hear of your critique.
I'm just asking you to defend it, I guess. What's so great about it? Just give me an example of where you have to use Bayes' theorem and you can't use anything else.
Well, I told you that means common use is efficacy for drugs. But you're the one with the degree in mathematics, and like I could have prepared if you wanted me to do this. I would have prepared some sort of presentation or like a paper that just goes through this. I mean, you do like a pop quiz for Doooovid to give like a pop-up tutorial on Bayes, but like presumably like anybody with a BA in math could learned and could do Bayes. I mean, like anyone in the chat like am I wrong that like not everybody's worked with Bayes?
I doubt anybody could.
To me, it's not even like Gödel. I mean, it's like people have heard of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It's like, oh, Jennifer disagrees with Gödel's incompleteness theorem, but it's saying like Bayes' theorem is actually something that like is used in like scientific papers constantly. I think even small level engineers and even like social scientists might use Bayes' theorem on a regular basis.
And what results do they have to point to as a sign that this is a good method? Like if somebody was like, I don't believe in calculus, I'd be like, I can tell you why calculus is awesome, but I can't say why Bayes' theorem is awesome. I'm just asking for help to perceive.
I have to prepare that. I'm saying like, I mean, I'm still trying to even eat my eggplant parmesan that I'm not just like Googling or a screen share, but like in my mind, like I can't picture like any person not being able to Google and within like 5 seconds pop up like an article.
I have. I've looked it up. I don't get it. I don't see it, I guess.
I mean, maybe because I'm an engineer and saying like Bayes' theorem is what you use. It's like Wolfram computation. You need results. You need a statistical method to give you the results. And Bayes' theorem is one of the more common tools that you use to give results when you need to use a statistical method.
Cool. All right. So, yeah, I don't know if there's anything else that I wanted to go over this week. We could probably...
I agree that there's flaws in it. And saying for what I'm trying to explain, you need a better statistical method than the statistical methods that are on the market. But like anyone who uses statistical methods, like I would assume that they'd be familiar with Bayes, and even Jennifer's saying you have a critique with that, like as opposed to the other statistical methods that you don't have a critique to.
Well, there appears to be truth to the central limit theorem. Most statistical methods are tautological, that is, that they're unfalsifiable on the level that they're defined, and they're saying that Bayes' theorem is unfalsifiable on the level it's defined. Maybe, but the axioms are
because there's multiple factors. I mean, Bayes' theorem is because there's multiple factors. The reason why you need a statistical method is because there's multiple factors, and both factors have error, and therefore you need a statistical method. And so the case where you're saying, oh, the problem is that there's error, and the problem is that there's multiple factors. And so if you didn't have error and you didn't have multiple factor, you wouldn't need Bayes. But the fact is there is uncertainty and there is multiple factors, and that's why you need statistical methods. And for science and like looking for truth, you're saying like, I don't want statistical methods and error rates. And that's why Doooovid has science is statistical factors and error rates. It's not truths and falsehoods. Truth is utility function. And at the end of the day, science and the multiple truth hypothesis is basically a statistical method that's going to give you utility value of truth, because that's what truth is.
A utility value of truth? I'm
We're
not.
saying we're saying truth is unknowable to any human process. That's a given. Anybody who knows science knows that science does not give you truth. Science gives you statistical methods that are relatively good at predicting outcomes in cases of uncertainty. But science is full of uncertainty. And at the case where the uncertainty starts and the knowledge ends, you have statistical methods. And if a person isn't familiar with that, like they're probably not a scientist. And so when you look at like multiple truth hypothesis as something that will include statistical methods, because statistical methods are basically our best, I don't call it best, but one of our best processes towards discovering the truth. And it's like Wolfram said, all these, looking for a grand unified theory, you're going to write an equation. And so people have given up on that. There's so many areas of science and they conflict and they may not unify, but it doesn't change the fact that we get better and better at computing answers to questions. And how do we do that? It's through statistical methods.
Well, I don't think that's the only way to do it. But yeah, there was something that was coming up in terms of our forging an understanding of consciousness and sort of unifying these ideas from the GMM UBM to the neural net and then finally to the quantum computer, is making a distinction that computation and cognition are not the same thing. So computation is happening on a more fundamental level than cognition, which is what's going to predict why you have people who are like idiot savants. So people who have really sharp memory for like one type of thing, but basically non-functional otherwise.
We even mentioned that these things are disputed because they're dependent on the higher problem of consciousness. And as I've done largely through the chess studies, but I'll continue with the studies in general, is that it's disputed whether there are two separate functions. And some people say that memory is in fact the only function and everything is just a function of memory or computation, versus dividing it. And then from the neurological hard problem of consciousness level, if there's two separate functions giving two different biological processes and methods that produce those functions, and saying all of these things are largely disputed. And if you hear anybody say, oh no, science knows the answer to it, it's like, no, you haven't read the scientific paper. Science has an equation with uncertainty and statistical methods that have pointed towards something being more true than something else.
Okay. I'm just trying to keep up with the chat because they seem to actually be talking about what we're talking about. Aiken says the Boolean decision-making process of true and false can be based upon any test as long as the test results and the outcome has a negligible error term. But how do you know that your machine is actually telling you what you think it's telling you? And that it's not actually telling you something, some artifact of the actual mechanical technology that you didn't anticipate? That's sort of what I want people to focus, to really zoom in on. Because
Rodian's right, saying we must develop. It's a year later, and I'm still saying we must develop our theories on consciousness. And saying like obviously it's kind of saying like we must wait for Messiah to come. Solving the hard problem of consciousness is probably the pinnacle of all of human wisdom and accomplishment. And saying it's a year later and we're still working on it. And next year we'll probably still be working on it. And like I'm proud of it. And it's like if Messiah hasn't come next year, I'll still be waiting for Messiah next year too.
Yeah, well, I kind of feel like it's like answer. It's just a matter of explaining the answer. Because there's two definitions for consciousness, and they're both acceptable. They just make different predictions. So I think that's more or
Well,
less.
it's the point of trying to explain the statistics. He's like, what is truth? And saying, what does it mean to have answered the question or explained something?
The only use I have for statistics in my model is modeling geometric distributions of fundamental particles, aka waveforms. Those have a probabilistic distribution wherein it's spherical, but then there's a Dirac delta upon observation that reduces it to an eigenstate, so it's no longer spherical, but its energy is conserved. So you have a probability distribution that's just moving around or deforming itself to a new state, and in that sense the probabilistic distribution changes upon observation. But then to go into say that you can obtain truth values using statistical regression analysis, it's not clear to me how that link gets made. Like, it's not clear to me how Bayes' theorem is giving a clearer picture of the underlying mechanism of how things are actually working. So I guess the question I have is, like, what is MTH going to do that Bayes can't do? AKA actually give your truth value in a hierarchical way. Because if there's no hierarchy associated with the truth value, that's saying, like, how do you know which one is the more statistically likely truth value?
Well, MTH in theory will give you of truth discovery value percentage-wise, where so to say you'll have a ranking of, through the statistical methods, of the probability of the various truths.
Yeah,
Well,
but
that's
that's
the
not
purpose of
answering
truth.
how that's going to be estimated. That's what I'm saying. Like, it has to
Well, I
be.
don't have to explain it to him. That's the point. It's a truth discovery function that it'll be a computer algorithm. It could be that it's beyond humans to actually understand, but a computer will be able to develop and articulate this truth discovery algorithm. So even it's irrelevant, your understanding of the truth discovery function.
Well, I mean, it's relevant if you want me to help you develop your model, because it's got to be put in an algebraic form. So
We
that
have
it
a
can be
form, an
translated
expression
back.
of the function itself in the derivatives, but it's saying of the infinite permutations of the equation in practice. So you're saying you have that for any given permutation that it had to go through to actually discover the truth, versus a short form equation of truth discovery of the multiple truth hypothesis.
Because I'm just thinking, like, how can we use the technology that what we know the existing technology can already do to set it up so that this could be implemented somehow? Because it seems like these neural nets are able to converge, at least
As of now, I would just use the best of the machine learning statistical methods. I haven't devised my own
they're
statistical
not
methods.
statistical methods, though. It's a misnomer to call them statistical methods.
said-
They're matrix.
I said
fundamentally
machine learning.
matrix.
I meant comma machine learning and statistical method. There's two prongs to it. That there's machine learning and statistical methods, not just machine learning statistical methods. I said one thing. There's two different factors that can and will be used to produce the same result. So in theory, you could take out a pen and paper and lay out axioms, devise some sort of simple truth discovery function to give weights to the axioms, and then rank it, versus devising a computer program or using even machine learning mechanisms to go about a truth discovery function. But saying, like, yeah, I could develop a simple truth discovery function that could be worked out on paper, and I would have to choose from the best of the various current statistical methods to help devise that truth discovery function. There's also mathematical machine learning truth discovery functions that are performed by the computer, and hopefully me or you together, or just me or you, will devise our own functions and work out of mathematics. But there are currently a plethora of in the multiple truth hypothesis doesn't need to provide my own statistical methods or machine learning algorithms. You could just take from the current available best practices of what's available.
I don't think that exists because these neural nets aren't using Bayesian statistics. They're using basically a bunch of matrices that they're multiplying the original file
Bayesian
by.
statistics could be adapted to matrices. I'm saying, so, at a
But
higher
that's
level.
what I'm saying. Like, it can't be unless you can tell me
Bayesian
why.
is simple algebra, but it's saying Bayesian can and is adapted to larger matrices, and so that might be technically have mathematical logical problems, but from a programmable perspective, I think that's the most common thing that's done for. I mean, if it's important, we could even do like a whole separate stream on Bayesian. I mean, I've covered on my home stream multiple times, especially related to consciousness. But Bayesian could be adapted to quite complex mathematics, including matrices.
Right, but what the matrices are doing are brute forcing a question. So even if you tried to integrate them with Bayesianism, they would just brute force their way around whatever was not information positive within the Bayesianism. So it would end up correcting for whatever. It wouldn't. You could start with a Bayesian whatever, but you wouldn't end with one because what you end up with is a pruned it's a pruned matrix because you're looking at all the results of the row by column multiplications resulting from a matrix multiplication to see which ones correlate. Well, the level of the correlation is that which ones consistently give a high result for matching samples and a low result for non-matching samples. And so the coefficients of the matrix are selected based on the statistical distribution of results given by the matrices, and then they're adapted and trimmed away. This is just how a GMM UBM works. This is not yet into the stage of neural nets. What neural nets do is add an additional level into the computing processor where it's more like a quantum mind, i.e. it has switches and weighted things and distributed type processing. So the information is stored more like it's stored in reality. So it's a more efficient algorithm, but it's still back channeling the positively correlated matricial coefficients. At no point does Bayesianism figure into that computation process. So that's why I'm trying to understand the value of it so that I can integrate it into what I already know the computer can do. Because the computer can really only do one thing, and that's answer questions we give it quickly. That's the limitation and the power of the computer.
Yeah, so I mean, it'll be important. I'm going to try to, on my channel, I'm going to put together, time and work, and even this guy Robert didn't seem to, kind of get the, like union of micro streamers exchanging best practices and just trying to schedule and grow his streamers. He just wanted to go straight into repeating his arguments again and again, or whatever his goal was. As where Dia Latinx seemed to intuitively more understand, even reading review as a concept. But the direction of multiple truth theory, I'm going to have to cover the current statistical methods available, and what multiple truth hypothesis is adding, and determine whether I'm going to try to create my own statistical method or actually draw on existing statistical methods and adapt statistical methods. And just saying that Dutton saying his theories, even to biological various things where there's cases of uncertainty and you need an answer to deal and limit the uncertainty. And there's a parallel to that, looking for the truth in cases of doubt from a theological perspective. And then, I was thinking to package multiple truth hypothesis as a mental technique for understanding complex ideas, separate from, what would be a scientific theory to objectively go about the discovery of truth versus just the mental technique to help people deal with complex situations. And like the Newton idea, the definition of intelligence is to hold multiple conflicting ideas in our head at the same time. So the multiple truth hypothesis as a technique for a person to function in a complex world and be able to hold multiple conflicting ideas in our head at the same time, meaning that I have two complete separate systems operating in my head at the same time without confusion that produce different results, because I'm able to keep two working systems that contradict with each other working and operating in my head at the same time. And so it's saying that a mental technique that's valuable to people. So first you have to philosophically explain to people that that is the phenomenon in the real world. And in order to be an intelligent person, that you have to understand that this empirically, this is what happens, that there's competing systems that give different results based on different axioms. And then that a person, despite all of the biases and cognitive dissonances and holdbacks that makes it very difficult to do, could hold in our head and work with multiple conflicting ideas at the same time. And so the multiple truth hypothesis as a technique to do that, to improve people's mental ability and be enlightened and work better together with people and get along better, because your reality is, that's one of the most important skills to functioning in the complex world, is working with multiple conflicting ideas in a person's head at the same time, versus scientific theory of an objective search for truth and even a mathematical search for truth, and to lay out a mathematical logical framework of what would scientifically, so to say, be the objected method of the discovery of truth, and to lay out a series of equations and statistical methods that say that the search for truth is going to always produce axioms that appear to contradict, and the method to deal with these apparently opposing contradictions is statistical methods that distribute the uncertainty of the opposing oppositions and give a distribution curve of probability. And that truth in a factual level, that if you had to search what is truth, you're going to have a series of statistical methods producing probability curves. And so that would also want to be developed. But a person in their head just to wrestle with the conflicting ideas, so like Doooovid, we'll call it Pilpul. Well, according to this rabbi, according to this system of belief and this system of axioms, this is the conclusion, because the axioms and the logical conclusions of the axioms are obvious. But this system that has a different set of axioms will produce this conclusion. And because you, Doooovid or Jennifer, are wise, spiritual, trying to be enlightened people, we could work with these multiple conflicting axioms in our head to produce different results at the same time.
Yeah, the real trick lies in not getting triggered by cognitive dissonance and being able to tolerate cognitive dissonance without acting on it. I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Someone in the chat is saying that axioms are called framing by some neuroscientists from Berkeley. I wouldn't call axioms framing. I would say framing is more to do with narrative. So narrative is an aesthetic of a historical interval. So it's a way of looking at a particular period in history. Now, axioms can exist without this. Axioms cause the aesthetic / framing to arise, but axioms can exist in the absence of the framing, because axioms is just the scaffolding upon which arguments are made. It's possible to do abstract logic, even though it took us the English language to get there, or whatever, the mathematical language to get there. We could still stand on its own outside of our subjectivity in some sense. So I wouldn't say that axioms and framing are the same thing, though they are.
These are words that come from separate fields and have different historical meanings. And if you're looking at a comparison of something that corresponds to neural circuits, you're saying, well, chunking. And at the end of the day, axioms or framing are both outgrowths of a form of chunking. And axioms isn't a biological cognitive concept. It's a philosophical concept. So when you talk
Well,
about
that's the thing. We're
framing,
trying to answer we're trying to answer the question of
Well,
how
I'm
does the
just saying that-
biological
that-
give rise to the
the
physiological.
axioms doesn't come from biology or cognitive science. Axioms has axioms, and just the word axioms comes from a Greek context where truth exists outside of consciousness, but there's objectively something like Euclid and these principles that are objectively axioms, and those exist outside of consciousness. So framing is a different approach where there may not be anything objective outside of consciousness, just making the point of the use of words and the implications of words. The axioms is generally a mathematical, philosophical word, and it may not have a direct parallel in the biological cognitive process. That way you use a word like framing because you're saying, well, it's a chunking process that produces it. So if an axiom is just a chunk, and for when you're working within that theory, that it makes easier sense to change the terminology framing. That's what me and Jennifer, in order to grow an audience or advance, have to work very carefully on the terminology and understanding why people in different fields use the terms the way they do. And just because me or her may feel that a term means something or not, that there's a current state of karma where there's a current state of people who think about a certain topic and have came to a consensus about using a term to express certain meaning.
Are you saying that the use of the word axiom itself has an axiom, which is that truth exists external to consciousness?
I was supplementing that. I mean, that you could argue with that, and I'm not, I'm not saying that's a fundamental tenet of Doovidism, but just as a point, I was saying that yes, axiom is axiomatically based on a Platonic system where truth exists outside of reality and separate from reality, and that framing is more a relative judgment where there is no objective reality and it is dependent on framing. That's what we're saying from a certain perspective. Axiom as a philosophical concept is irrelevant to framing. That no matter how you frame something, an axiom is an axiom, and if axiom is dependent upon framing, it's not a real axiom. As opposed to a conscious cognitive perspective, you could argue that there is no such things as axioms, and therefore all axioms are dependent on framing. So I'm not sure if he meant this deeper theological issue, and I was trying to give some insight into why in cognitive science you might use the word framing as opposed to mathematics or philosophy. You might use the word axioms, and you could create a big divide of dualism and I don't know why it's slipping me. The opposite of dualism or materialism, that axioms is inherently a dualistic concept.
Well, there's like three main schools, which is the pure non-dualism, qualified non-dualism, and then pure dualism. So generally that has to do with what is God's relationship to the material realm. On what level is the dichotomy happening? Like, is one a subset of the other? Are they in opposite realms, kind of thing?
Well, and when you say he's saying that chunking is not framing, and he's saying that chunking is the only process that we know that actually occurs. So
Well,
if framing
Wait a minute.
occurs,
How can we be sure that chunking occurs?
well, you can't even really be sure that chunking occurs. And you're saying,
I
no,
think
you can't.
I think we can. I think we can
chunking
be
is not
sure.
framing. Chunking is the process that all cognitive processes are filtered through. And so if framing is a cognitive process, it's a derivative of a chunking process.
Yeah.
And that's why I meant the dispute about memory and calculation or cognition, because some cognitive models, because Doovid has mentioned this many times, there is no cognitive theory of where calculation happens in the brain. There's a brain and memory, language and memory, vision processing, sensory, very clear. I've run on my channel, but where 1 + 1 = 2 happens in the brain, there's basically zero evidence that happens in the brain at all. So cognitive scientists that are working on the higher problem of consciousness and assuming that these things arise from the brain, a lot of the models believe that cognition is a function of memory, and that cognition doesn't actually exist, only memory exists. And what we call cognition as a philosophical or human concept in the realm of language is actually a derivative of a mental neural process of memory.
Do you know what the logical flaw is in that?
Well, it's not a logical flaw.
Well, there is a lot. I'm not blaming you for the logical flaw.
You're saying that the hard problem of consciousness is not answered. This is one of the better directions towards the solution towards the hard problem of consciousness. And of course, the hard problem of consciousness is not answered, and any of these possible supplications that might answer the question is going to have logical flaws to it.
Damn, I forgot what the logical flaw was.
Well, I mean, it's like a game. It's like, of course, like you're just like pointing out, like the higher problem of consciousness is not yet solved. Oh, like, you know, this theory that might help solve the higher problem of consciousness has logical flaws. Like, of course. But I'm saying, you're saying that there's a logical flaw because Doooovid is telling you that cognition and mental processes happening in the brain is pure fantasy.
Oh, no. I remembered what it was.
Any
I
person
remember
that
what the
claims to
logical
understand
flaw was.
science that thinks this occurs in the brain is just telling you fantasy.
No, I
And a
wanted to say, no, it's like a really
psychologist
specific.
or a person with a real theory for the higher problem of consciousness trying to tell you how these occur are going to tell you that it's a function of memory or chunking or something like that.
Yeah, what I wanted to say was that to say that only memory occurs is the logical fallacy, because a memory implies that there's something being accessed, which means something has to access something. So there's an accessor and a thing which is accessed. And so to say, well, it's just memory itself implies dualism existing, wherein there's the thing accessing the memory and the memory itself. Those things are separate.
Well, I mean, that is a point, but no, I'm saying that the idea would be that memories are formed as a simple chunking happens as a simple result of input reaction. That light comes into the eye or patterns through sensory input comes into the body, and the brain per force tries to make a pattern out of it. And if the pattern previously exists, it draws up from memory a closest pattern. If the pattern
it tries
doesn't
to harmonize. It tries to harmonize with one of its eigenstates.
Yeah, it doesn't require an ego to do it. It's just a natural reduction of energy because the sensory input is an input of energy. And
yeah, but there's still a de facto ego. The de facto ego is the fact that the reduction is happening at all. The quantum state reduction happens, therefore you have a de facto ego, i.e., which is causing the quantum state reduction, even if it doesn't literally quote unquote exist, which of course it does exist in some sense.
But it's not you, it's the law of science. The fact that the reduction state doesn't happen because you did it, it happened because it's the law of science necessitated.
Yep. And that means there's a de facto ego.
Or consciousness is an illusion.
There's a de facto ego operating, even if it has, and
no, there's no
But the fact, that's what I'm saying. The argument is that the fact that quantum state reduction is happening means that there's a de facto ego, which is the quantum state reducer. Even if there's no literal ego, which there is something causing the quantum states to reduce, and that's the de facto ego.
But that's your theory, and then I might try to subscribe to your theory, but that's not one of the main theories that are.
All I'm saying is that even if there is no ego, whatever that means, there's something that functions as an ego because the processes of the mind include this waveform reduction process. The cycle of the mind
quasi-closed state.
Sorry?
Saying the ego, there is no functional ego. There's just a quasi-closed state. So you're saying that because the energy reductions occur in a quasi-closed state, yes, that's like an ego form,
you could say the ego is our subjective metaphysical representation, our, whatever you want to call it, of something that's just a natural process. We are subjectivizing a natural process, and our term for that is ego. We're saying, oh,
Yeah,
well,
but
it's
because-
actually, it's a bunch of different things, but we're just going to assimilate it into one thing. We're going to say, yeah, it's this machine that's generating consciousness, even though the machine is actually external to us, hence why it's a quasi-closed system, right? But the fact that it's quasi-closed is supremely important, because the level on which memories are stored isn't the same level on which day-to-day sensory impressions are forming necessarily.
Yeah, but I mean, if you didn't understand the point of this little debate here, it was to understand the concept that thought and cognition, according to Doooovidism, I mean, not just according to Doooovidism, according to many of the spiritual masters, is not something that happens in the material realm. It's a process of the spiritual realm. And there's the idea axioms implies dualism, because you're saying these ideas exist separate from material realm. And
Yeah,
from a
maybe
cognitive
repeat what you
perspective-
mean. Maybe repeat what you mean about axioms imply dualism, because I agree with you, but I don't think it's self-evident.
Well, it's the Platonic ideas of forms, that there are no perfect circles in the material realm, but there's an idea of perfect circles, and the idea of perfect circles exist in the spiritual realm, or the idea of forms of bookness or chairness. There is no such thing as a chair or a book. When you say there's a concept of chairness that is similar to all chairs, that is a form that exists in the spiritual realm. In the material realm, you have a bunch of objects that may correspond to the archetype, but the archetype is something of the spiritual realm. And I mean, that's really straight Plato, and even Euclid, in the idea of axioms generally were accepted and created in a dualistic system. So we have a derivative of these Greek dualistic ideas in a modern materialistic society, where we have adapted these dualistic Greek ideas to work in a largely materialistic framework. And Doooovid is saying it's a flaw and it's completely false, and that only people who have not thought through it would fall for it. But your average person will likely, because ignorance is the natural condition, go through these flaws, and they're not going to know that the origins of these Greek ideas are dualistic, and that the ideas by nature necessitate dualism, because in the modern era we're taught these ideas as materialistic ideas, even though they're not. And from a logical perspective, he's saying, regardless of the ideas and their origin, a logical breakdown of materialism, and a question: what does science know and what doesn't it know? So people have faith in brain science to supply answers that brain science does not actually supply.
That's true. And I think if we want to get on the path of supplying those answers, we have to understand on what level, biologically and logically, the chunking is happening. Because whatever process is happening is a fractal, which means it's not just chunking once, it's chunking multiple times
But chunking is just a
simultaneously.
process.
It's a
you're saying-
process, but it's
you're saying a chunk
the
could
quantum
be an
computer's
axiom.
distributed. It's a distributed processor, so it's always potentially putting energy in all the states simultaneously, unless there's some reason not to.
Really, that's why the multiple truth hypothesis becomes more and more important, because there's so many points of uncertainty to go forward in the to just try to derive these processes of a chunk. And if you look at like a chunk as an axiom, as a memory unit, as a neural configuration of a makeshift best do pattern configuration, and then you question, are two chunks the same? If one person looks at an object that they've never seen before and form a neural chunk, and another person, are those neural chunks the same? Are they different? Are they expressions of the same thing, or do they express things that are slightly different? And because we don't actually have physical neural processes, these are basically completely hypothetical, and science has close to zero answers to these questions. And from a theoretical perspective of the mathematics, pure mathematics, like if we created an equation and then permeated the equations, and this equation in theory could solve these complex answers and then ran some equations and made predictions and said, "Ha ha, this equation, we've solved it," or programmed a computer to do it, where we're saying that the computer has the answer and has the equations and could produce the answer. Ha ha. Versus an accurate view is saying that the computer may have distributed and reduced uncertainty, but the uncertainty is still there. And so the multiple truth hypothesis is meant to work with that uncertainty as a given, to locate the uncertainty, and to give some sort of numerical estimate to points of uncertainty through a truth discovery function.
Okay. I kind of feel like it's got to go in a direction that the technology is pointing, which is
But
continuing.
all of the above. That's why I mentioned there's a pure logic form, like handwritten, there's a computer form, and then there's also a factual representation basis of what's actually happening on a neuro level. And technology might not converge. Technology might produce more uncertainty.
Well, it is converging because of this result where for the Reynolds number for fluids, they were able to get 99% for Reynolds number of 1,000 accuracy in the model versus the real fluid.
Might be examples of where technology converges, but technology does not necessarily in general converge.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that it can be made to converge depending on how well, because it can only answer the questions.
No,
you
I'm saying
give it.
that there's no reason that you're saying, like, I mean, you're putting some axioms that may or not be true to say that. So I mean, you have to.
It's been demonstrated through the neural nets because they use a huge amount of data, siphon it down to a smaller amount of data that is information positive, i.e. complies to these statistical exigencies. Because you have to understand they all use a huge amount of training data where they already know the answers. It's not a blind training.
But yeah, I mean, because you really have to. I'm going to go through the work on my channel and read out the papers because, like, we can't really have intelligible conversations of this without correctly using the nomenclature that the people in the fields use. So, like, hopefully sometime in the next few months, sooner the better. I have the papers, already read through them a few times, but I think we have to be precise in the language and nomenclature and what the current state of has been done, hasn't been done. And I'm almost at the level to start releasing parts of the multiple truth hypothesis, but I just see the difficulty me and Jennifer are having, and it's because there's so many vibrant fields, cutting edge with producing new results, and each of these fields has like their own nomenclature and their own technical terms that sometimes mean different things than they do in other fields.
Well, yeah, that's always going to be a challenge, and I just try to get around that by using the most general term as possible. Like, to say algorithm is extremely generic, and to say matrix multiplication is extremely generic. And anyone who knows anything about how computer programs
You can't just try. You have to, like,
I'm not
in
trying.
order to succeed in the academic realm of like pure science, like, you can't just try. You have to use the correct nomenclature, and the only way to do that is to do the homework, to do the work.
For yoking Platonism with modern quantum field theory, there is no accepted jargon because the field doesn't exist. So I say archetype, is that the right term? Well, as far as I'm concerned, it is, but there is no term. So I take your point, but in some cases, it's not. There is no accepted term. But I just try to use the most generic terms as possible, and I think you do too.
Well, I mean, because there's uncertainty, you want to use the most precise term as possible, not the most generic term. And sometimes
no, it's good to use generic terms. It's good to use generic terms because then you have no chance of being wrong. Well, it doesn't matter how the algorithm works, just that it works.
What audience you're talking to. So if you want the most precise answers, you use the most precise terms. If you want to reach the most amount of people, and precision is not as important.
No. Not if there's a probability of people misunderstanding. I consider the probability of people misunderstanding to be very high, so I try to minimize it by using generic terms, which are easier to look up.
It doesn't matter if people misunderstand it or not.
It does matter if people misunderstand it, because I want people to actually have a chance at learning something.
I mean,
Otherwise,
science
what's the
is
point?
true whether people misunderstand or not. If your calculation is correct, it's got nothing to do with perception.
And I care about whether 70% of people get it or
Science
10%
doesn't
of
care
people
what you
get it.
care about. I mean, that's why I told that science does not care about your feelings.
I don't care about science's
I might care about your
alleged
feeling. Your
protocols.
audience does. But I mean, separate that. Is saying science does not care about your feelings.
Well, if there's ever a time where you think I'm using too generic of a word and you want me to be more specific, please let me know. But just as a general practice, I think it's better because I don't know the implementations of all these algorithms. I don't have
Well,
these
it's the
numerical
purpose of
methods
Bayesian
memorized.
that you seem to, yeah, I guess, just be missing that
No, I get take
you're
your
gonna have
point. It's
different
something
rules. You're gonna have different
no, I get
frames.
it.
And sometimes you want general, sometimes you want precise. And when you want precise, and someone gives you general, that's the wrong answer. And you
Okay.
say when you want general, and someone gives you precise, you say that's also the wrong answer. Although you could argue that the depths of it, and if you're saying that like you have a low IQ audience, so therefore you give general answers, and I'm saying like, yeah, I have a low IQ audience also, so I speak in generalities, but occasionally I have a high IQ audience, and when I have that high IQ audience, I will speak in precision.
There's a question in the chat about whether precise terms are the same thing as axioms. Every definition is a type of axiom, but axiom is more general category of things that has to do with what rules are like allowed for formal logic. You need to have axioms in order to do formal logic because there have to be certain things that are considered true from which other truths spring forth. So that basic layer is axioms. So it gets a little more complicated when you're talking about things like biological axioms, which is a shared root of consciousness that on some level the computation for consciousness is convergent. We don't know what that level is, but that it is. So that there's some type of shared biological axiom, and that axiom exists. We can prove that it exists because we're all, carbon-based, DNA-based, but we don't have words to speak of it per se. Whereas we have words to speak of the axioms of mathematics, for example, where we can say like, yeah, we'll just invoke the axioms of a vector space and we'll be cool with that. But axioms become important when you start to ask metaphysical questions where the nature of the answer is going to depend on the nature of the question, and some questions end up being far more predictive in their scope, i.e., have more information that they give you compared to others. But yeah, eigenvalues is probably the most non-generic term that I use, and that's just because eigenvalues is the language that they chose for quantum mechanics. They're saying any observable is an eigenvalue. Well, is it actually an eigenvalue? It's like, yeah, in the pure sense of the term, maybe not. Maybe it's like some echo of an eigenvalue because the eigenvalue is specific to the waveform, whereas the observable is specific to the observation device plus the waveform. So we just have to make sure we're alluding to the same geometric constructs when we undergo the process of logic.
Okay, what do you want? We've been at this like 3 hours. I mean, there was more we could talk about, but we could also just end it, or I don't know if Aiken wants to come on, or if you have clips or ramble. But I think I'll probably, if we aren't going to end, I'll probably need a break. But we've been at 3 hours, so if you just want
it's been a pretty long show, so we can wrap it up. It's been a good one. It was interesting to chat about a few things, and we'll keep talking, and hopefully we can talk about any success either of us has had with actually writing something, and sort of maybe encourage each other to do it because it's tough, but it's worthwhile, I think.
Yeah, and I want to say that you like a progress, that we're not just repeating ourselves, that we're making progress or towards a goal. And it's okay, we're trying to solve the hard problem of consciousness, the most difficult of all questions. So it's like a goal that's too big to obtain, but I think we are making progress. And in the meantime, we might be solving smaller problems. Just to close up Tuesday, incremental progress event. I have back Henry Doktorsky, author of Killing for Krishna and 11 Naked Emperors, a deranged devotion. So he now is coming out with his 10-part history on Swami Bhaktipada and the West Virginia Hare Krishnas gold, guns, and God. And very interesting. Anyone knows the history of the Hare Krishna movement? Prabhupada had initiated, I think, 5,000 people, most of in America, like over 3,000 of in America. And in the 80s, there was a low point, started dying out. And there was only like 500 people left that were still following the Krishna consciousness laid out of Prabhupada. And 150 of those people lived in the compound in West Virginia. And what was started by, questionable, shady character that was possibly, God forbid, homosexual and drug dealing and involved in murder conspiracies, God forbid, was able to build a miraculous temple that's gold plated by hand of Hare Krishna devotees themselves. So very interesting. Tuesday, be back on my channel and cover his role that he played, and his documenting of writing a 10-volume history of the largest Hindu commune in North America, I believe, and especially and that was created by these converts to Hinduism through Prabhupada, and possibly shady practices, but over a period of time created quite a compound and temples and accomplishments and different people that, for whatever reason, were part of Western society and decided to retreat to a compound in West Virginia dedicated to Krishna. So I'm looking forward to having Henry back on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. And a lot of the dynamics like Gandalf, you want to talk about the church, I forget the name, whoever he at period of time was going to talk about. But a lot of this stuff about pattern recognition, conspiracy, um, human nature, it's interesting. Flawed people, and you see someone like Kirtananda Bhaktipada was a deeply flawed person, but was transformed by Hinduism and accomplished miraculous things. Literally built a temple dedicated to Krishna in the middle of farmland in West Virginia with gold plates that was possibly funded by drug dealing. And at the same time protected, like the Luke Ford were talking about him as protecting the women and children, trying to create this community of this theoretical lifestyle that's better. But it's hard to do it, and you have to live in the material realm. And so you have some sketchy characters that you deal with in order to protect the women and children, so the women and children could have that protected environment or the priestly class or the inner realm to say, like, I know that it's important that this exists. And because the world is in such a fallen status and I have to deal with the outsiders, that the guru himself will have to accept some of this upon himself, or however, so it'd be interesting. And so I hope to talk about that with Henry Doktorsky and encourage him to come out with all 10 volumes. And I think he's only came out with a few volumes he may have written about it, and there's really a lot to this today. You're saying the documented history of the Hare Krishna movement, and this guy's writing a 10-volume history of just one West Virginia, the New Vrindavan settlement. So I'm looking forward to that. Same time as Edward Dutton was, 2 p.m. Eastern time, and this man was also the orchestral leader. He actually did the gold leaf carving, so he was one of the people who, when they built the temple, was involved in the cutting of the gold leaf for the Golden Temple, and had a degree in music, and headed up the orchestra that played in the temple.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on the show. It was a great exchange. I'll just blab a little bit about eigenvalues.
Okay, yeah, go as
when
long
you
as
head
you
off.
want. Okay, so I'll sign off. Thanks, Jennifer, as always. And
Thanks, Doooovid.
yeah, I think these arguments between me and Jennifer are going to actually start producing results, and you see hopefully we could start recruiting. I'm not really an IQ person. I use the terminology of IQ, but generally I'm a dualist by saying people that have deep interest in more deeper ideas, and Aiken or other people that have on their own already spent years and years thinking and understanding about related ideas. that they might be able to come in and immediately add the years and years of thought they put into related ideas. So with that, enjoy Jennifer's rambles.
Hey guys, yeah, so why do I always talk about eigenstates when I'm also making the argument that I'm trying to make the most generalized term? Well, it turns out that this is the most generalized term, even though I know most people are not familiar with this, because when I was a tutor, this was the subject most people sort of got demoralized either at or around this point and had to seek help. So I get it. And, this particular choice of wording is not ideal. So if we look at Copenhagen interpretation number 3, it says during an observation, which is, remember, the same thing as a waveform reduction. Okay. System must interact with a laboratory device. When that device makes a measurement, the wave function of the systems is said to collapse or irreversibly reduced to an eigenstate of the observable that is registered. So this is their terminology, not mine, but it is a good term to work with because algebraically, eigenvalues are very, if you state that, that's very information rich statement, because for a matrix to possess a particular number of eigenvalues and eigenvectors means that, number one, your matrix is invertible, and you know the rank of your matrix, which is the number of independent rows, right? So to speak of eigenvalues and eigenvectors in the context of algebra means that work's already been done on your system of numbers to figure out what its dimensionality is. Why it applies to how I'm applying quantum mechanics, which is itself a coordinate system or a philosophical system or an axiomatic set, take your pick, is because this is actually harmonious with how it really works, right? So, you're trying to think about like what is the mechanism of thinking thoughts. And I think this one will be intuitive, is you think a thought which turns the volume up on whatever is associated with that thought, whatever feelings or other impressions are associated with a particular thought. So every time a thought is thunk, it amplifies. And the more you think something, the more likely it is to think the same thing in the future. So that seems pretty self-evident. Perhaps it's not self-evident that the thinking of the thoughts is self-amplifying, but at least we can see it on the statistically longer time period that the more you think about something, the more momentum the thought has and the more power relative to the rest of your mind that the thought has. And so the eigenvalue / vector formalism represents this idea really well. So what is this algebra saying? T of v equals lambda v? Well, the easiest way to really see it is in the diagram, which I saw on the last page, but here's one example. Here we go. This was the one I wanted to bring up. So for every matrix, it has a certain number of eigenvalues and eigenvectors. Doesn't matter what the matrix is. And matrices represent what are called isomorphisms, which is taking something with a particular geometry and shifting around that geometry in a manner that preserves the information. Well, what does that mean? It means that it's possible to define another function that will go back to the original function, which is what you call a bijection. So it really all comes down to dimensionality. Why is dimensionality important? Because it tells us about how much information is in a system, which the measurement limit tells us that actually information is a finite thing. And so there's a finite dimensionality to information. And so it's just up to us to find the basis of this finite dimensionality, which turns out to be really hard. But people like Aiken, who do work in applied science that's actually trying to model computers after consciousness, can come in and help, because they could say, well, yeah, these eigenvectors exist, and we can start to hone in on the family of eigenvectors that might look like a solution for something longer term where we could actually, but we don't actually, because our computer power is so high, we don't actually have to find the basis vectors. We just have to converge on a low enough percentage of error. But anyway, back to what I was saying is the utility of this is twofold. One, you're already going to be using the same lingo that they've been using since the Copenhagen interpretation. And two, this is actually kind of how it works, even though you have to have always a little asterisk on the side of your thought process where you remember that algebra is based on the axioms of a vector space and reality is not a vector space. It's not, and it never can be, because vectors have the operations of calculus defined on them, and our universe precludes calculus in the sense that if I went out to try to do what calculus is doing, I would encounter the uncertainty regime where the observational effect becomes part of the observed. So you get delta x, delta px, or delta e, delta t. Product of those two respective amounts is bounded by a constant, which is called the Heisenberg constant. So we have this limitation that calculus doesn't actually work in reality. But it also, we can prove using our mathematics that calculus is the best approximation to reality, but it's not really reality. But because our approximation to reality is like on the boundary of reality, we can still use it. We just have to remember that what's really governing reality is a series of quantum state transitions, not a continuous deformation as would be suggested by the axioms of a vector space. But we can still use these constructs that come out of a vector space because there's a bit of an equivalence that takes place because the amount of information in the mind is just so darn large. So it's almost, I don't want to say it's almost infinity, but the fact that this is how our computers solve things, even if it's not how we're really solving things, that helps us to understand our minds as what are called tensors, because tensors are what you can implement directly into computers. But you just always keep that little asterisk at the side of your mind, remembering that the operations of calculus affect physical systems. If you're actually going to go take a derivative, that's going to cause an uncertainty effect. If it's a massive system, the derivative is sending a distance to zero. Well, real distances can't go to zero. They'll fall apart as two particles or waveforms enter, as two massive waveforms approach the same quantum state. They are naturally repelled because of something called quantum state exclusion. So this is your basic argument against calculus. That doesn't invalidate calculus. It just means that calculus only works when it's not drowned out by other factors, i.e. adjacent quantum state transitions, which will just propel you into a completely different, although energetically adjacent, maybe not physically adjacent configuration. So we have to allow for these transitions, but also understand the power that exists within matrix algebra because that's how the systems are currently implemented. So hopefully that helps. And there is some algebra associated with eigenvalues and eigenvectors, but in and of itself is not useful to know. But what's important to know is the underlying idea that the information is connected to the dimensionality of a matrix, and it's really hard for us to reduce gigantic matrices, i.e. the things that are produced by the neural nets and the GMM UBM. So someone's saying that derivatives don't create uncertainty. Well, what's the derivative? It's the limit as the slope of the tangent goes to zero, right? So if you're measuring a tangent, you have to take a pencil and draw out the tangent, right? So imagine you are shrinking that tangent literally to zero. The universe cannot get to zero because there's granularity on the micro scale, as in space doesn't look the same way on the micro scale as it does on the macro scale. It's quantized and it's approximately continuous on the macro scale. So micro scale quantized, macro scale non-quantized. Therefore, the derivative, that operation in real life, is trying to define something that is not defined, i.e. the limit as it goes to 0 is not defined. It's the same problem as the alleged problem with Newton's gravity formulation. What happens when r goes to 0? Well, f goes to infinity, and well, that's wrong, right? But it's not really wrong because it's just precluded by the universe. And so when you get down to the atomic scale, yeah, calculus fails. But when you're on larger scales, calculus works. It's the best approximation we have. So calculus is okay when you're outside of the uncertainty regime, but inside of it, i.e. when delta x or delta t are sufficiently small, you cannot rely on calculus, because any operation of calculus, and this is also stated in Copenhagen interpretation, is that the operations act on the waveforms, right? So this is the problem with quantum physics, is that this fact has not been taken into consideration. So there's a excess of what appears to be independent information coming out of the calculations because the axioms are wrong, i.e. they're axiomatizing conservation of space, which is not correct. You have conservation of space-time, but not conservation of space, because you have this uncertainty principle. And yes, I know what a derivative is. So I'm saying that hypothetically, if you were going to go take a derivative IRL, that it would cause quantum field effects, aka the uncertainty principle. So this, I think, is fairly solid logic. It's just trying to explain the limitations of calculus, but this isn't calculus per se. This is algebra. So it's a linear approximation to the ideas of calculus. So it's not going to ever be exact, but it's going to be something we can use to recursively get closer to something that's going to be progressively more exact. So yeah, thanks for listening, and look forward to the next show. Thanks for all the questions. Aiken's asking if my space is bounded. What do you mean bounded? Bounds are, I don't want to say arbitrarily imposed, but they're circumstantially imposed. So if we want to talk about my consciousness versus your consciousness, then I impose a boundary between the consciousnesses, even though universally speaking, there's this a foundational consciousness. So there's no, way to actually meaningfully separate consciousness from itself on a physiological level. We can insert synthetic axioms, which are approximately correct because it ends up being approximately that we don't feel that we're sharing consciousness, even if we have a shared root of consciousness. So I hope that answers the question, Aiken. I'm not even sure that I'm understanding exactly what you're asking. So in this case, I'm talking about the space of the individual quantum mind, which would be itself. And so it's bounded by itself, but it's not true. Like Doooovid said, it's like a semi-closed system because it's open to the food that you feed it. Because that's what the body is essentially something that powers the mind. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next Sunday, if not sooner. Bye-bye for now.
Yeah, but that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of.
It's so important that she can't be told, she won't be told that it's wrong. And
bringing it back to Church of Entropy and her attack dog Gandalf the White.
Why don't you learn to shut up and fuck your goddamn logic?
They control the media, and the media is capable of making the sheeple believe in anything.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, we've had these streams, and I've been doing the Church of Entropy, and she's been bringing on new people, and we did those streams on stream etiquette. We walk through the technology.
I have very strongly negative opinions of the kind of Brundle clique.
Is she trying to garner herself prestige by associating herself with a retard?